One day, the protagonist was having tea with her daughter and talking to her. The girl suddenly told her that if she was to be reborn one day, she should live only for herself and do what she wanted to do. The woman didn't understand why her daughter was talking about such things. The woman smiled and replied that rebirth was a popular topic in magic classes. The main character did not understand her and said that her daughter's fellow students should study better if they want to graduate. But the girl continued and remarked that even if such a thing happens to her mom, she will still be her daughter. She added that since she was Baron Heldy's daughter, she would not get a status higher than Countess in the future. The girl was sure that when reborn, her life and the lives of others would not change dramatically, apart from some small things. She admitted that if she had the chance, she would not hesitate to give up her mother. The woman looked at her daughter and asked about chances like this in life. The daughter reminded her mother that although she didn't have the most remarkable appearance, she was still a mage. The woman laughed and said that if she got a similar chance, she would not give birth to her daughter as she did not want to go through the agony again. The girl asked her mother to meet another man who would understand the paintings that her mother painted, not her father. This amused the woman, as she realized that her paintings were no better than her daughter's grades in magic. The daughter suddenly remembered that her mother had once told her that she had a first love, and then she asked her mom to confess her feelings to the man she fell in love with when she was young. Time has passed, and the protagonist has had an accident. Her carriage overturned. The servants ran out calling for help from passers-by. The woman was taken to the house and put on a bed, but the doctor said it was a very complicated case, so they could only hope for a miracle. The husband asked to reduce his wife's pain. At that moment, her daughter leaned over to her and reminded her of the words she had spoken recently at tea time. The woman fell asleep. When she woke up, she found herself in her parents' house. She couldn't believe this was her room where she lived with her nanny, so she wondered what she was doing in this room. She assumed the accident was a dream, but suddenly she was called by name and told it was time to get up. The girl's nanny came into the room and reminded her that it was Monday and time to go to class. This surprised Lady Riken, for she remembered that her nanny had died 6 years ago. The nanny anxiously asked her mistress how she was feeling, if she was sick. Riken said she was fine, but reminded the employee that she was dead. The woman didn't understand the humor and asked the girl if she was having a bad dream. The protagonist then ran to the mirror, looked at herself, and realized that she had gone back in time to the fall when she was still young. It was October when she turned 19. At the time, she was just finishing her degree and graduation from the academy was approaching. And after graduation, she married Harold Headley. The Viscountcy of Copeland was in its own special way beautiful and not an easy one. Though they had their own traditions, it did not create deep fame and history. The same could be said about the main character. She wasn't insanely beautiful, and she didn't possess any outstanding talents. Parents in her heart and friends valued her as a person, so she was betrothed to the eldest son of Baron Hadley. Harold was a good and honest man, so he lived a conscientious life. He saved money and loved their common daughter. And also his mother was proud of him. My mother-in-law thought that her son was perfect because he did not drink, did not gamble, and he did not have a mistress either. So his wife rolled like cheese and butter in her opinion. But Harold was not a perfect husband and was stingy with jewelry for their daughter's dress. The simple pleasures of life were not for him. Even at the wedding, Riken had to wear shoes without heels, as she and her fiancé were the same height. That life was boring and without much color, but something in it changed with the arrival of a small child. It was their daughter who was born with a talent for magic. And although it was a very controversial phenomenon, both mother and daughter were happy. At that moment, the woman realized that it wasn't all a dream, as the memories stayed with her and she remembered giving birth and raising her daughter. But now she was 19 again, and her body had not yet known a man, but no dream could be so detailed and vivid. And then she snapped out of her seat and ran to find her mother, all the while remembering her daughter's words that if she was reborn, she would have to live a life of pleasure. So, Riken went back in time. The nanny ran after her and asked her to stop because she wasn't wearing her robe. The main character was worried about the fact that she never told her mother that she loved her until after she died. It happened that the main character's mother went deaf after she turned 70, so the girl was always annoyed when she had to communicate with her parent. Eventually, she grew tired and learned sign language, but this led to more irritation. A similar scene happened the last time they saw each other. Now Riken ran to her mother and asked the maid where she was. The girl replied that she had gone to look at the flowers. The girl ran up to the study. She hadn't heard the maid's words about not being able to enter the study in just her pajamas. Riken flew practically into the study and saw her father there, who was very forcefully surprised. The girl looked at her father. She remembered him as a very strict man, but then she had gotten dementia. He aged quickly and started acting like a child, so over time it became very painful for her to look at him. The father pulled his daughter close to him and began to calm her down, asking about what had happened. Then he turned to his guest, Sir Sturmel, and asked him to wait a little while. The guest said he would wait. And then the girl realized that in front of her stood none other than the guy of her dreams, which confused her, as she had never been in such awkward situations before. There was no doubt about it. Standing by the window was Sturmel Raft. The girl's father did not understand what was the matter with her, and the nanny said that her mistress had been behaving in this manner ever since she awakened. Riken found an excuse for her action, saying she had a nightmare, so she wanted to see her father. The man thought his daughter was in pain, as she was acting like a child. Mrs. Rhodes said she would ask the doctor to examine the young lady. The head of the Roa apologized to the girl and said that he had a very important conversation, so he had to get back to business. Then he added that he would stop by at lunchtime. Riken asked her father to tell Sir Sturmel that she was sorry that he had seen her in such an inappropriate manner. The father was surprised that his daughter knew their guest, but then he remembered that he had graduated from the academy last year. Then he thought that since his daughter knew this young man, he was obviously very influential. Riken understood that even though the young man was the illegitimate son of the Raft family, but he had never, during his time at the academy, missed the top spot in the overall ranking of students. When the nanny and the protagonist were left alone, the woman reminded her mentee that it was time for her to get ready for the academy or she would be late, but the girl replied that she wasn't going anywhere. The young lady asked her nanny to skip a day of school because she wanted to see her mom, who was due back soon. At this moment, the girl was well aware that studying at the academy was not extremely important to her. She pondered over what was the most important thing in this educational institution. The most important was a talent for magic, for it was the mages who had the greatest power in their country. Girls entered the academies because of magic as well, so their share wasn't easy either, as talent for magical arts was quite rare. It was known that mage girls with rare talent could not visit places where boys were. Aristocrats who have no talent for magic are also forced to enter the academy. In addition, girls did not want to receive the same education as boys. Talented girls dreamed of becoming great magicians, but they did not want to compete with boys. Therefore, the academy taught the admitted girls art, etiquette, educating from them noble ladies. Their mentors promised to teach them everything they needed to be good wives. And after graduation, they were all expected to marry. This was much more important to the students than the various sciences. Suddenly, she remembered one of her conversations with her daughter. She had said then that it was more important to do what she really liked and wanted to do. She assured her daughter that attendance at the academy was not the most important aspect of learning. Riken realized that her daughter had more limitations than she did. Only now she realized that she had probably been sneaking out of school. She was lying in bed now, thinking about the fact that she had no energy or desire to go to school. Only when her mother arrived was the girl able to calm down and begin to realize and accept reality. Mother said it got colder earlier this year, so there weren't enough flowers. Since that was the case, Riken suggested that her mother put the bouquets not in large vases, but in small jars. She assumed that they would have enough flowers from the greenhouse for the small bouquets. She made a composition with buttercups, rose, and sprigs of eucalyptus, and later, narcissus and jasmine can be added. The woman was delighted. She liked the composition very much. She recognized that her daughter did have talent, and then she turned her attention to the main character and asked her what her problem was. Riken said she didn't have a problem and just wanted to talk. The mother smiled and reminded her daughter that she hadn't spoken to her in a long time because she didn't like her nagging. The girl assured her mother that there was no trick in her actions. Riken started hugging her mom, remembering the reason she had stopped talking to her. She now realized that since she was able to be reborn, she wanted to be much kinder to her parents so that she wouldn't regret her actions in the future. Until the hardships of life took over her, she made the decision to embrace her parents and speak words of gratitude and love to them. And in the future, when the memories faded, she wanted to be confident in her actions. After she went back in time, she began to make small but important changes in her life. 1. She stopped being angry at Polana, with whom she'd had a fight, and stopped communicating. 2. She had chosen a completely different dress for the prom. After all, no matter how many times she looked at her last dress, she realized that it didn't fit her at all. Now she had chosen an outfit that would definitely suit her, changing its color, embellishments, and such, even though everyone was against it. But even after being reborn, she did not immediately become a great person. Everything remained the same: the face, the talent, the intelligence. She knew that soon her father was going to introduce Harold to her as a suitable husband, and she would marry again and live as before. Nevertheless, for herself, she had decided not to meet Harold in this life. Now she seemed to understand why her daughter had said that there was no need to give birth to her if she went back in time. Until she became a radically different person, she would not be able to change her life. But the daughter was her whole world, for her sake the protagonist, and lived all those years. In this life, Riken decided to continue learning to draw, as she regretted giving it up in her previous life. A classmate came to the workshop and asked the protagonist if she had chosen a prom partner. Riken replied that she was going to go with her father. A friend said she was going to go there with Lawrence. The protagonist knew that in the past, she would have envied her classmate, but not now. Then she asked her friend not to move far away from her companion. The girl didn't understand why Riken spoke the way her aunts did. The main character said she didn't know if she had someone in mind for prom. Her friend assured her that there was nothing wrong with dating someone. It was time to go home. It was raining, and the maid had not yet come to greet the young lady. The girl realized she couldn't go to the wagon in the rain, so she stayed behind to wait for the maid. She was reminiscing about the past, but suddenly Stürmel came up behind her and said hello. A man she liked was standing next to her. It was raining, and she realized that she seemed to be in an interesting situation. Riken was worried about him seeing her a few days ago in ridiculous pajamas. The girl had no idea how she was to communicate with him now, or how to address him. The man looked at her and said his name was Stürmel Raft. The protagonist crouched in a curtsy and introduced herself as Riken Copeland. The girl apologized to him for the last time she had appeared before him in an inappropriate manner. She said she had nothing to apologize for, and the Viscount looked very agitated. The girl thanked the young man for worrying about her father, but assured him that nothing terrible had happened then. There was an awkward silence afterward. Riken knew that the Mage Tower was located at the Academy, so it was no surprise that they had just met. The main character knew that this guy was a real genius, though not many people still knew that now. The young man was a unique mage who possessed two elements at once, water and wind. But they won't find out about that until 2 years later, and in the meantime, he'll be the illegitimate son of Sirianel, grandson of a marquis, but by no means an aristocrat. However, once the queen dies, the king will marry Sirianel and recognize a son who will officially take his father's surname. Since Stürmel was illegitimate, he will not be able to claim the throne, but the king will grant him the title of Duke of Sagna. Riken realized that this young man was beyond her, so she didn't count on anything, and he was her first love a long time ago. And although she had an interesting conversation with her daughter, she didn't think seriously about a relationship with him. The protagonist realized that this guy in front of her was very young and not like the Duke Sagna she knew and secretly admired. She remembered that she had always found him attractive, but one of the problems was that she was older than him. But as it was, right now her heart fluttered at the sight of him. Stürmel was just as she remembered him. He had a mild and calm demeanor, creating a cold atmosphere around him. The girl was so much immersed in her memories that she did not immediately realize what the young man was asking her. He wondered if she was standing there because she did not have an umbrella or for some other reason. It was so. After all, if she went out in the rain, her dress would get wet and ruined, so she waited for her maid to come. The young man continued to show interest. He asked her if she was cold standing there. Riken admitted that she was a little cold, but if she got cold at all, she would go into the workshop. Stürmel looked surprised, and the girl added that there was a painting circle workshop in the main building. But the girl did not quite understand him correctly. The fact was that he knew that there was an art club at the academy, because he had seen the exhibitions that the members of the club held in the main building. This news confused the girl, for she remembered that few people attended their exhibitions. But one of the few who came was Stermel. This was news to Riken. She continued talking. In her opinion, there were few people in the academy who were into drawing. Most of the students wanted to be visible, so some of them stood out for their studies. Others showed themselves in relationships. Magicians strived for the top. Future heads of families learned management, and drawing was a hobby for those like her, who had a lot of free time. The young man didn't understand her train of thought, as he didn't think she was shy, and that was because of that awkward incident in her father's office. The girl sneezed and immediately caught his strange look. He apologized for forgetting his manners and detaining her in such a place, and asked her permission to walk her to the carriage. Riken was surprised. She thought he was standing there with her because he didn't have an umbrella either. But that wasn't quite true, for he had begun to conjure and said that since he was a wind mage, he could easily control the weather on days like this. After the guy finished conjuring, he held out his hand to the girl in an inviting gesture, but she hesitated whether to accept the help or not, though she remembered him as a cold-blooded and calculating duke who wouldn't use magic to guide a stranger to the carriage. But now she was accepting his help as she thought her luck had smiled on her this time. They were walking on practically dry grass that Stermel had dried with magic, and then she smiled dazzlingly and said he was the one who was incredible. That confused the young man. The girl looked delighted, but in no way surprised, which the future duke said at once. Riken recognized that right now it felt like she was inside magic. The young man led the girl to the wagon from which Penny ran out. She apologized to her mistress for being late, but the lady had no intention of scolding the worker. The girl was getting into the carriage. She was excited to have a new memory with the future duke. At that moment, she remembered her daughter's words again, but she assured her that he would not reciprocate her feelings as he was a future duke and a great mage. But nevertheless, her heart was pounding frantically. Though the old world was not so easily broken, she still called out to Stermel, and he turned around. In order to change her fate and not regret anything, the girl decided to be brave and asked the young man to accompany her to the prom, if he had not yet promised anyone. This request discouraged the young man, and he did not know what to answer. And then he smiled and said that if Viscount Copeland gave his consent, he would be happy to escort her to the prom. This made the protagonist unspeakably happy. But the girl's mother did not share her joy. She did not understand where it is seen that someone like him accompanied her daughter to the ball, because he is illegitimate. Her mother did not understand what kind of caprice her daughter had, for she had always been a modest and timid girl who did not catch the eye in high society. Everyone knew that Stermel Raft was the illegitimate son of the Marquis of Raft, the product of her reckless behavior and a stain on the family's reputation. Even though the young man was born into a noble family, there was no way he could inherit a noble title no matter how great a mage he was. Riken understood that it would have been easier for the man to have been born into an ordinary rather than aristocratic family, and then his talents would have been more quickly recognized, but things happened as they happened. The whole world knew his name and face, so he didn't get to hide the secret of his origin and identity. Marquis Raft's family was the second after the royal family in their country, and 100 years ago, they had held the dominant position in an independent state. And now they had a completely different status compared to other families in the empire. But problems arose after Sir Stermel was born. The circumstances of his birth began to negatively affect his future marriage. He charmed many girls, but there were still no rumors of a wedding. Riken was worried about her mom's reaction to the news, so she asked her not to blame the young man, because she was the one who invited him to the prom. The mother did not understand her daughter, for up to this point she had always been accompanied by either her father or grandfather to such events. Riken was sure that Sir Stermel could not be interested in her. The girl was sure the man had done her a favor. Riken looked at her mother and told her that she wasn't asking for her permission to get married. She was asking for her permission to go to prom with this guy. Nothing more. The mother and daughter hugged each other. The woman was surprised that her daughter was behaving like an adult. Lady Copeland realized that most likely her girl wanted to remember her prom and she would probably be bored going there accompanied by family members. Riken wondered if her mother had wanted to remember her prom. The woman admitted that she remembered the event because she went there with her daughter's father. Riken considered her mother and father lucky, but the truth was that her mother disobeyed her father at the time. The girl dreamed that Harold would be like her parents, as those were an example of a strong and happy family. In her own family life, there was nothing like that. There were no feelings or emotions between them. It wasn't just the man who was the problem, but she hoped she would be happier this time, since she already knew Harold well. Riken decided to forget about Harold for a while and enjoy every day of her new life. The girl was alone in the room, and Penny came up to her. The lady asked her not to worry, as she did not take Sir Sturmel seriously and just wanted to go to the ball with him. The maid had no idea her mistress was so bold, but Riken insisted it was only a ball and nothing more. Penny admitted that she was very much surprised to see the man and her mistress together, for the young man had used an obscene amount of magic to keep her dress from getting wet in the rain. The maid did not understand why her mistress was so pessimistic, for if she did not like the man, he would not agree to go to the ball with her. Riken asked the maid not to tell anyone about their conversation, as she didn't plan to meet him after the ball. As the high society was very fond of gossip, Penny rejoiced, for she longed to see her mistress happy. What happened in the past was that the maid suddenly quit her job and married a man 8 years older than her because she became pregnant. Riken asked Penny to let her know if she had a lover. Penny said she didn't have anyone, and mistress said to tell her if she had any problems, because she cared a lot about her and wanted to help. After this conversation, the girl sat down to write a letter to Sir Sturmel. She began by thanking him for the honor of accompanying her to the ball. Then she added that her mom had given her permission to go to prom with him. She also added that she was looking forward to his visit and promised to prepare warm tea. The first thing that caught the young man's eye was that the girl had put flower petals in the envelope in addition to the letter. He began to conjure and soon realized it was lavender petals. At this moment, a servant came to him, who was very much surprised, for it was a letter from a girl. The guy thought his master was completely drowsy and didn't realize that only unmarried young girls wrote such letters. The servant continued his thought. He thought that his master was not at all interested in the girls and did not distinguish their faces except for their mother and cousin. Sturmel began to deny it, but the assistant insisted on his own, because in his opinion, his master had broken more than one woman's heart by his refusal. It turns out that the young man was not impressed by the Earl of Melon's heiress, Earl Wayne's daughter, who was a recognized beauty. The man admitted that he didn't pretend that he didn't know the Earl of Wayne's heiress. He knew what she looked like, but he had no idea what kind of person she was. The only thing he knew for sure was that she was crazy about him. The assistant reminded the master that last time, because of another rejection, someone started claiming that he had a cold heart since he was a water mage. The boy was prying. He wondered from whom Sturmel had gotten the letter, but he didn't want to admit it. But then he confessed that he had arranged to escort Viscount Copeland's daughter to the prom. The young man looked at the letter again. He realized that the girl who had written it was only 19 years old. But there was a sense of adulthood in every line, which was written to the point and nothing superfluous. He supposed that maybe she liked him, but she didn't show it in any way. The assistant did not understand what was happening to his master, whether he had changed his taste, for Lady Copeland was too simple and unassuming for him. Sturmel said he would keep the girl company only once for the ball, and that was all. But the servant had no fewer questions. The young man claimed that he simply could not refuse the lady who had the courage to ask him to the ball. And then the boy, Gerald, assumed that Lady Copeland liked the boss, for which he fell into disfavor, because he loaded him with work and demanded reports on previous assignments right now. Meanwhile, Riken stayed up all night from worry, as she didn't want to hit the dirt. A maid flew into her room with a red fish, for Baroness Belita had told her that the fish would have an immediate positive effect. Although Riken was grateful for Penny's concern, she did not put the fish to her face and asked the maid to bring her better honey. But looking at herself in the mirror, she realized that even without the honey, she didn't have a single wrinkle on her face. The girl decided to start taking care of herself from a young age, because then in 10 years, she will look younger than her peers. Then she began to look at her dresses. The girl couldn't understand why she liked something so cute when she was younger. Her clothes looked a little rustic, and the ruffles would make her hair look luxurious. She wanted to look sweet and defenseless, so she decided to go for a low-key outfit. The maid came back with honey. Riken gave the dress to the maid and asked her to quickly remove the lace from the collar. Afterward, She asked the maid to borrow a handkerchief from her mother to cover her shoulders, and then asked for help applying honey to her face. And so Riken began mixing the ingredients of the face mask. She remembered that she used to do this often with her daughter. But her daughter was fast asleep, and she gently wiped the mask from her face. Now the protagonist missed the most important person in her life very much. The maid was getting Lady Copeland ready for her prom. Her mother was watching and didn't understand why her daughter was making such a fuss when she just wanted to decorate her dress. Penny put the girl's hair up in a bun. Her mother noted that although the hairstyle was a little old-fashioned, it suited her daughter, and in her time, she had often done it herself. And then she went over and gathered the handkerchief around her daughter's bodice with a ring her husband had given her just before their wedding. Riken was grateful to her mother and promised that she would pass the ring on to her daughter. The elder Lady Copeland looked at the girl and noted that she was a real beauty. At that moment, the butler entered the room and announced that a guest had arrived. Riken went quickly down the stairs, where a mesmerized Sir Sturmel was waiting for her. The man handed the girl a bouquet and said he had prepared a small gift for her. Riken accepted the bouquet and looked a little confused as this was a momentous occasion for her. It seemed to the young man that she did not like flowers, but it was not so, and she invited him to come inside and have a cup of tea. Sturmel gave her his hand and she accepted it. Thus they went into the house. They entered the house and Riken explained that they were in a room that used to be used as a music room. But now no one in their family plays musical instruments, so it is used for small tea ceremonies. Besides, if you opened all the windows, you could see the garden, and since the day was hot, the girl thought it would be appropriate to spend time here. The young man noticed that there were ginkgo trees growing in the garden, and Riken said her mother had planted them. The girl admitted that they don't have a particularly large and unique garden, but there are many trees whose leaves fall differently than most others, so the foliage looks very romantic. Sturmel admitted that he knew what she was talking about, as walking on fallen leaves was much more pleasant than on asphalt. Riken asked the maid to bring the vase and thanked the young man for coming to visit her. Afterward, she smiled and said she would try not to make him uncomfortable, but the man realized that he was the one who could hurt her, as she even had to ask her mother for permission because of him. And then he added that he originally thought she had asked him to accompany her to the ball because she was in some kind of ignorance as to his identity. So it seemed to him that when she found out the truth, she would send him a letter of apology. At that moment, Riken realized that Sir Sturmel was different from other bastard children of aristocrats. After all, when his mom Syrianelle was dumped by the man who was supposed to marry her, she was already pregnant. And then began the gossip about what had happened to the Marquis's daughter. Everyone wanted to sting her, because her behavior was unacceptable. Everyone was pointing fingers at her for having a child out of wedlock. Riken, on the other hand, assured the young man that he and his mother had no reason to worry about her and her intentions. He was surprised and took the cup to hide his embarrassment. He realized that not many people stayed around him out of good faith. The girl was now already embarrassed, as her motives were quite different and the guy didn't understand them. The maid brought a vase, and Riken asked Sturmel why he had bought asters and not other flowers. After all, they weren't often used for bouquets. The young man said they caught his eye and thought the bouquet was not to the girl's liking, but she admitted that she liked such flowers better than roses or lilies. She said she would put them in her room as they would perfectly decorate the furnishings there. The girl said that later she would pour water into the vase, and the man clarified what kind of water she needed, whether she should add something else. She thought about it and added that she should add some sugar. Using Voti magic, the young man conjured water and sugar and moved the bouquet into the vase. Riken was surprised, for the sounds of her daughter's spells sounded like a xylophone, but her lover's sounded different. The girl thanked the guy for letting her see his magic for the second time. He argued that it was nothing special, since this kind of thing was learned in the first stage. But to her, his skills were at a high level and seemed like something incredible. At this moment, Riken realized that Sturmel was embarrassed and said that maintaining magic for a long time was really not easy. Just then, a maid came in and brought on a tray what her young mistress had asked for. The young man did not expect her to wear a dress of purple color because although he was far from high society, but he had heard that they preferred bright-colored outfits. Lady Copeland admitted that the color red doesn't really suit her, so she decided to wear what suits her, not what's trendy. Then she held out a small gift to the young man as a thank you. Riken was sure that there would be no problem, since the young man had prepared a suit of delicate colors for the occasion. And since he had accepted her invitation, he could accept the gift as well. Sir Sturmel accepted the velvet handkerchief. He realized he should have stopped there, but he couldn't. The young man couldn't resist and asked the girl to help him choose and create cufflinks to match his costume for the prom. The problem was that he only had cufflinks to his suit for every day, because he didn't often appear in public, and he hadn't had an occasion to wear a tailcoat before. Sturmel realized that if she wore cufflinks that were too plain, they wouldn't match her outfit and it would be out of etiquette. Riken, however, realized that in this way he was suggesting that she meet again. Because of her silence, the young man assumed that she didn't want to cross paths with him unnecessarily, but she was happy to receive such an offer from him. So the young man left, and Riken asked the maid to leave her alone with her thoughts, as she had some things to think about. The protagonist looked at the bouquet of flowers and reflected on the fact that she had agreed to meet with Sturmel one more time. The girl realized that she had managed to survive this meeting, but what she should do next time was still a question, and it was hard to call their communication a strong progress. To top it all off, she was worried about what she should do with Harold. And on the other hand, she reassured herself that nothing had happened and this would just be another friendly meeting before the ball. And now, the day of the new meeting has come. But before that, the protagonist met with her friend, who was overwhelmed with emotions about the fact that she found out that Riken goes to the prom with Sir Sturmel, and in addition they have a date today. Even though Riken had asked Mariella to keep her voice down, she couldn't contain her impulses. The girl wouldn't shut up. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, because Riken was saying it, so it sounded very unbelievable. Lady Copeland had indeed not long ago agreed to marry whomever her father chose for her, and today she was making all this trouble. However, Riken assured her friend that it wasn't a date, and they were just going to buy him cufflinks for the banquet, which was exactly what Mariella thought a date was. The girlfriend hoped Riken wouldn't go shopping alone with Sturmel. She didn't believe the girl's mother could allow them to be alone together. Lady Copeland said that they would be accompanied by Mrs. Rod, and her friend asked her if she thought the young man liked her. This seemed impossible to Riken, since they had only seen each other twice. Mariella said that maybe Sturmel had agreed to accompany her friend because he was friends with her father, but today's meeting didn't fit into that scenario. The girl was sure that the atmosphere between Riken and Sturmel wasn't so bad when they were alone together. Lady Copeland realized that this was true, but the trouble was that 2 months after graduation, she would meet Harold, and she owed it to herself to meet her daughter again in the future. At this moment, Polana came up to the girls and asked what they were secretly talking about. Mariella told her what was what, and then their conversation was heard by the Earl of Wen's daughter, who approached the girls, accompanied by her friends. Lady Wayne used to like Riken a lot, as she thought she was a beautiful and mature girl. But now she was beginning to realize that it was only a screen. Riken had noticed that even though they were the same age, they hadn't really bonded before, but she was glad they'd gotten a chance to talk today. Lady Wayne insisted that Riken tell her what she had been talking to her friends about, and she decided to tell the truth, that she was going to the prom with Sir Sturmel. There were different rumors among the girls of the academy, but it was known for sure that Sturmel refused and ignored everyone. Lady Wayne was one of those girls, but nevertheless, she asked Riken to keep a low profile so that their idol's favor would not go to waste. As soon as Lady Wayne left, Polana spotted a bird of water in the sky not far from them. It was magic, and Sir Sturmel began to speak to the girl through it. The man wasn't surprised at what she knew about magic, and the girl added that she only knew basic things, but had never seen anything outstanding, like she did now. Riken added that he's an amazing magician. The young man thanked her for the compliment and asked if she was out of class. She informed him that she was about to leave the academy. Lady Copeland suggested that he meet him near the main entrance, but he said he would walk up to her building, as it would be impolite of him to make her walk much. The girl's friends had been following her conversation with Sturmel. They thought it was all very exciting, even though she said they were going to buy him just cufflinks, and then she went away remembering Lady Wayne. Riken walked down the corridor and realized that she had indirectly but annoyed Lady Wayne. She was afraid there might be trouble. Suddenly she felt a strong pain in her foot and thought she had put on those uncomfortable shoes for nothing. The heel of these shoes was high and thin, and it was difficult to walk in them unaccompanied, so she hadn't worn them before. Now she regretted her stubbornness and childish behavior. At that moment, she was called by Sir Sturmel, who was hurrying towards her. The first thing he offered to do was to carry her books, but the girl claimed she had no trouble doing it herself. But the young man would not listen to her and began to take the heaviest books. He said that although they looked thin, they were heavy together, so it would be better if he carried them himself. Sturmel noted that the maid had not come for her again, as she had the first time they had met at this very spot. The boys around them whispered, and the girls were jealous. It was like this. Her nanny was supposed to come for her today, but there were too many people here now, and she was most likely waiting for her in the carriage. Since that was the case, Sturmel motioned for Lady Copeland to proceed to the carriage. Now they were walking together, and her heart was pounding frantically. She remembered the emotions she had felt when she married. She had been excited then too, but not because of love, but because of their future together with Harold. Next to Sturmel, she could walk freely in heels, as he was tall enough as it was, rather than having to adjust to him. Riken realized that she was partly being a fool, because she had no idea what she would do if she really loved him. The man noticed that his date was too quiet, so he asked her to tell him right away if she didn't like something. But she was fine with it. It was just her first date. And so they reached the carriage, where Miss Rode was waiting for them, who, though she tried to feign friendliness, was not very good at it. As they rode in the carriage, there was an oppressive atmosphere in it. No one interrupted the silence. Nevertheless, Riken soon inquired where they were going, but the man smiled and said it would be a secret. The girl had no idea where they might be going, as it was definitely not the road to the jewelry store. They arrived. The coachman opened the doors for Sturmel and informed him that he had brought them to the address indicated. The man then helped the girl out of the carriage, for which she thanked him. The first thing Riken smelled was the smell of paint, which let her know that they had arrived at Inzola Street. Lady Copeland was surprised, as they were on their way to pick out his cufflinks. But he told her that they had come here because he remembered that she was fond of drawing. The young man suggested she walk a bit, as there was a great artist store down the street. But if she couldn't go, they could choose another place. But Riken didn't want to change anything, as she had always dreamed of visiting this place. It was a special place that she dreamed about in her dreams. It was a paradise for artists, so craftsmen from all over the continent came here to get the materials they needed. Sturmel could not believe that the girl had never been here. She confessed that the butler bought everything she needed for painting, as she could not visit such places alone. The young man offered her something to pick out for herself, since they had come here after all. The man could see that his companion liked his idea, but he also realized that he needed to ask permission in advance about where he could and could not go, and looked forward to the new meeting as a matter of course. At that moment, Riken noticed that Sturmel was smiling and asked him what it was about. His answer was simple. He was glad to be here with her, because he realized that the girl had the ability to make people around her feel comfortable. They arrived at the shop and were greeted by the owner, named Kartal. Sturmel told him that today his companion, not he, would be buying paints and introduced her. Riken noticed that there were many paintings in this store. They were by young artists, and the aristocrats who came to the store were looking for masterpieces by famous masters and did not perceive such a style. So they went up to the second floor, and there the girl found many rare materials that were very hard to get in the kingdom. She also heard for the first time that the Kingdom of Frozen made pencils. But that wasn't quite true, and Kartal told her in confidence that they called frozen pencils the wooden pencils from the principality. Sturmel was pleased that Riken was enjoying everything, and her nanny, watching all this, did not look happy, as she did not expect her mistress to be interested in this man. The woman didn't understand why Riken's parents allowed her to date him. After all, he was the illegitimate son of the Raft family. Riken's eyes widened as there were so many different new amazing materials that even smelled different. For some reason, the girl thought the young man might have painted or done sculpture, but he had never painted anything. Sturmel, on the other hand, said he came here to look at the paintings on the first floor, which is how he got his interest. The young man added that he came here because of magic. It was known that among practicing water mages, there were those who could not immediately recognize their power if they had more than one stream of water. So, if you add paint to one of these streams, it becomes easier for the magician to distinguish and control them. But Cartel burned the client's office and said he knew very well that the young man himself was interested in painting, because last week he had bought a sketchbook and pencils. Stermel was embarrassed and said that he too could do sketches, but he had no talent for it at all. Nevertheless, he asked the girl to show him her work, as she must be very good at drawing. But she wasn't sure about that. The store manager said that Stermel could depict streams of magic on canvas, but the man said that the mere mixing of colors without intention could not be called art. Afterward, Stermel said he came to look at a few variations of purple paints to see how they would interact with water. And then he showed a cufflink. Riken was surprised because there were no gems in it, but the man had put some magical ones in it. Riken knew that magic stones were a mage's primary tool that contained his mana. Every mage works differently with this tool. Often they will use something directly from which they can quickly extract mana. Her daughter had created such a tool from a pocket watch, but she didn't use it much, as it was low on mana. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper offered Stermel several shades of purple of his choice and a small amount of water to test. And Riken asked Cartel to use the canvas and brushes and promised to buy them a little later. The young man wanted to buy her brushes as a gift, but she protested and said that she should choose her own brushes and buy them. After all, this was the first time she had ever bought her own painting materials. And so she chose the color she liked best. It was clearer than amethyst and brighter than purple jade. Riken realized that if you looked, you could find jewelry with the same stones, but they were quite rare. The girl picked up on the fact that the man was right in that the paint changed color when mixed with water, but she had no idea which one would be suitable for creating magical stones. The young man thought about it. He wanted to show her how the process happened, but there wasn't enough material here. Stermel continued and said that he needed a lot of pure water to create the magic stone, so he was willing to show her everything if she came to the Mage Tower. At that moment, the girl suddenly remembered that she had forgotten to give the mage his magical bird item, but he refused to take it back since it was created from crystal, so it could be used for household purposes. Cartel noted that all the magical items that water mages created were very beautiful, but not everyone can make such exquisite things as Stermel does. The girl also asked about whether this shop had items other than art items, or if there were magic items here as well. Cartel admitted that he liked jewelry more than magic items, as they weren't often bought for decoration by aristocrats. The owner then asked Stermel if he had thought of making some magical items for his shop. The man was even prepared to ask permission from the Tower of Mages for such an occasion. But Stermel refused, for he was a magician, not a jeweler. After that, he started to show the girl what to do with the bird. So, in order to send a message, she would need to roll up a note in a tube and put it in the bird's beak. After she releases the bird, it will come back to him. That way, they can exchange short messages. Riken was surprised that the young man was giving her such an incredible thing. Stermel replied that the thing was very conspicuous, so it couldn't be used for anything important. Although the bird was very beautiful, it was impractical. The young man added that he wasn't giving her some incredible magical tool, for this bird had only one function, and when the girl wasn't using it, the item would only serve as a decoration for her room. And then he suddenly realized that the bird might have just not liked the girl, but it was just the opposite. She thought it was too valuable. The man persuaded the girl to accept the gift and told her that when she got tired of it, she would return the bird to him and he would use it for paper. To this, she agreed. Once the couple was done with their shopping, Castell advised them to go to the Mythe Andor showcase. But Stermel was worried that they had to walk there, which might tire Riken and not please Miss Rod. But Nanny said it was all right if they walked a little. But the shopkeeper began to persuade the nanny to stay with him and have a cup of overseas tea while the couple took a walk. Miss Rode resisted at first, but then agreed to have tea, but warned Riken that if she was not back in an hour, she would go looking for her. Riken and Stermel went to the exhibition. The young man agreed with the lady that the shopkeeper knew how to ingratiate himself with other people and was like a friend who knows better what you need. It was the first time Riken was genuinely excited about something. She was having a lot of fun walking down Artist Street. Here, the girl found the works of young masters who had no name yet, and she liked them better than the works of famous masters, which could always be seen in any aristocrat's house or gallery. And on one of the paintings in the album, she saw Rodrigo's signature and thought that this must be the artist from the future. He would be the one who would become a world-renowned artist 20 years later. Unfortunately, his fame came after his death, and all his works were instantly sold out, and in the future they became very expensive and impossible to find, and now this painting was sold here and there where no one willing to buy it. But the seller would not even attempt to sell it. He said it was only a sketch, so could not be displayed in the house, and was not worth the attention of such a noble lady. Nevertheless, Riken asked how much the painting cost, because she wanted to buy it. She knew that 20 years from now this painting would be impossible to buy for any money, but right now it was only worth 1 silver coin. The problem was that she didn't have any money with her, but Stermel offered to buy it for her as a souvenir. He suggested she think of the gesture as a gift to the lady, which meant her mom wouldn't be mad. Riken realized that the price for the painting was very low, so she asked Stermel to pay 2 silver coins for it. But the man thought that even this money would not be enough for a gift for her. They paid the silver coins and asked the salesman to divide the money equally between him and the artist. The man was sure that the artist would be very happy about it. And she also asked that the artist be asked to come to visit her at Viscount Kaplan's house. The salesman was very surprised, and the girl asked that when the painter arrived, he should tell the butler that he had come to see Riken Copeland and be taken to her. If he came, he would receive a cash reward from her. The man bowed and said that Rodrigo would be very much welcome. The seller ran to meet the artist, and Stermel asked her if she would sponsor the author of the painting. Riken walked on and realized that Rodrigo would definitely become successful in time. She was sad that he would not see his success in his lifetime and would live in poverty all his life. The girl realized that she might not be able to fully sponsor the artist, but she would help him cover the cost of materials. Stermel looked at her and said that if she made that decision, it would be a real blessing from heaven for the artist. At this point, the young man added that they had no time left to go to the Rosenthal Gallery. Riken was sure that if it was like Cartel said, there would be works by notable masters, but they would still have time to go to the exhibition next week. She also confessed that what people usually called masterpiece, she didn't particularly like, because they were too noble and outstanding. In this, Stermel was in solidarity with her. He too disliked the robots that most people called art, so the girl asked her companion which painting he liked best of the ones he had seen. Stermel thought about it and said his favorite painting was untitled and amateurish. He also admitted that he was into art not too long ago. At this point, Riken felt pain in her leg. But when the man asked her if her legs were tired, she said they were not. But he could see perfectly well that she was tired. So he offered her a rest at a sidewalk cafe. Riken, however, was against it, as Nanny was waiting for them in the shop, and the weather was beginning to turn bad. The young man assured the girl that she shouldn't worry about the weather, as long as he was by her side. Stermel realized that Miss Rode would probably scold him for being late, but he couldn't let her go any further, knowing that her feet hurt badly. The young man sat her down at a table and said he would buy her a cup of coffee and bring it to her. Riken took off her shoes. She realized that if she rested a little, she could probably find the strength to walk to Cartel's shop, and from there, it wasn't far to the wagon. At this moment, sitting in this cafe, the girl was happy as she became one with all the people from this magical street. And then Stermel came up to her and said that since it was getting colder, he had borrowed a cape for her. The young man sat down as well and said that he had ordered specialty coffee, but it had to wait a bit. Riken replied that there was nothing wrong with that, and she would wait, as she wasn't particularly thirsty. The girl confessed that they in the house mostly drink tea and not often coffee, because she heard somewhere that coffee is bad for health. Stermel, on the other hand, said that in the Mage Tower, it's a pretty popular drink, and he uses it often. After all, many people can't wake up properly without this beverage. So the tower host fairy takes a kettle, brews coffee, and pours it for everyone in the room. Suddenly, Riken remembered that his daughter also drank coffee all the time, and then could stay up all night and was full of energy. Afterward, the girl said she was a little tired, so Stermel suggested that she have some coffee and go back to Miss Rhodes' shop. The waiter brought a cup of coffee with a heart drawn on it. Stermel said it was drawn with a stiletto. Riken, on the other hand, was reminiscing. Her daughter also loved coffee. She had even prepared a machine at home to brew it herself, and later taught the servants to do the same. Riken was thinking too hard, so she didn't notice the young man addressing her, so she apologized to him for not paying attention. They sat and looked at each other, And then he said that sometimes he felt like she was looking through him to somewhere far away. Riken lowered her eyes. She admitted that she had too many thoughts in her head, and so she was often distracted. The young man admitted that wasn't what he meant, and then noted that she was a little cold, and he also wanted her to focus more on him. The girl admitted that this behavior was too kind to her. Sturmel, on the other hand, realized that he wasn't as good a person as she thought he was. He wasn't the kind of man who would waste his time on someone he wasn't interested in. He looked at her and told her that he was interested in her and was courting her like a girl he liked. After a moment, the young man asked the girl to call him Stör. The man took her hand and told her that her nanny would understand them if it rained. It happened, and she caught a cold. In her past life, the protagonist had also met several potential suitors, which was a turning point in her life. But for the secular society, it didn't matter much, as it was common that the daughter of a viscount would marry the one her father chose for her. However, the problem appeared that the girl was not sure that she could overcome the difficulties if Sir Sturmelraff's name was among the potential suitors. Will she have the strength in the future to tell her daughter about it and call him her first love? Now in her bedroom, Riken realized that she needed to stop communicating with the young man right now, because if a little more time went by, and she probably wouldn't be able to. Yes, she wanted to be braver, but she didn't think she'd go this far. Just then, Penny ran into the room and said she had a visitor. It was a painter whom the girl had previously called to visit and had asked the maid to keep an eye on whether he would come or not. That got Riken out of bed, and she asked Penny to take the painter into the living room. Rodrigo sat in the living room with his head down, thinking that he had not expected any of the aristocrats to buy his album from the merchant. He saw a 100-year-old painting in front of him, and he didn't understand how a man who had something like that could like his drawing. The painter was panicking. Even when Penny brought him snacks to eat while he waited for the lady, the boy could not resist eating, for he had been hungry lately. But here he was fed, and he thought that the mistress was very caring. Riken changed her clothes and walked out to her guest. They introduced themselves to each other. The girl said she saw his work and was very impressed. The guy thanked her for paying as much as 2 silver coins for his work. Lady Copeland admitted that she wanted to buy a couple more of his works and sponsor him to the best of her ability. Rodrigo realized that his paintings were not yet good enough for such a noble lady. But Riken still said she would buy his paintings because she liked them no matter what or how they were painted. Then she added that drawing is her hobby, so she understands something about painting. The protagonist claimed that she realized at first sight that in his work lies an amazing technique and sense of style, knowledge of the subject and emotion. The painter blushed as he realized he had received praise from this noble lady. Riken, on the other hand, confessed to the guy that although her family lives well, but they are not rich. So although she decided to invest in his work and in him, but it will not be some huge amount of money. Riken promised to make arrangements with the cartel's shop on Rosenthal Street. That way, the lad could buy materials for the work and put it in her name. Rodrigo bowed his head and thanked the lady, and gave his word that for her sake, he would create something incredible and unrivaled, and then asked her if there was anything he could do for her right now. Riken, on the other hand, replied that she didn't need anything, as she would have several sponsors in the future who would be far more influential than she was now. Nevertheless, she asked him to name her as his first sponsor, as she would be truly honored. When the artist left, the girl wrote a letter to the cartel's shop and asked the butler to take it there. The servant could not believe that the young mistress had dared to sponsor someone. After that, the girl went to her workshop, and her father also came there, who needed to talk to her. A man noticed his daughter hanging a new painting. She said she received it as a gift from the artist. The painting was called Evening Dawn, and it now belonged to the protagonist. As soon as Rodrigo got home, he took this painting and gave it to Riken through the butler. In the future, this work would become his immortal masterpiece, which could not be valued in money. So looking at this work, the girl realized that it was too expensive a gift for her modest help. But Penny assured her that it was not worth returning the painting to the artist. The maid also heard that the works of this author were not so popular, so they were not often bought. And if her mistress returned the painting to him, it would hurt him very much. The girl's father was looking at the painting. He didn't like it too much, but Riken was delighted and wanted to hang it in the music room, since they had few guests there and it wouldn't embarrass anyone. The head of the family admitted that he was a bit surprised when he heard from the butler that she had decided to sponsor an unknown artist. The man realized that at her age, few people thought about such things, but he was glad that his girl had taken such a step. And now, though he was a little busy, he found time to have a cup of tea with her. Since that was the case, Riken decided to walk her father to his study and make them tea. He asked her if she liked going out with Sir Stermel, and she said yes, which reassured him, for he knew the magician was not a polite man. The Viscount realized from his daughter's reaction that they hadn't just bought painting materials, but he knew that he couldn't interfere in her private affairs just like that. But he couldn't allow them to see each other further either. The head of the family realized that Sir Stermel was a very dangerous person, as he was a powerful water and air mage and could cause various cataclysms and problems. Father and daughter were already sitting in the study, and the girl asked about how the latter had met Stermel, since neither his relatives nor her mother's relatives were close to the Raft family. Riken also knew that the Rafts were far removed from politics, so could not be connected to her parents' work. Suddenly, Sir Copeland realized that his daughter was ready to marry, for even now she was analyzing the situation and had always been a judicious child. The girl made tea, and her father told her that he had met Sir Stermel because of his work and a certain Orpen theory that was popular in the south. The dam there collapsed 3 years ago, causing a disaster. Then he was contacted by an old friend of his from the academy who worked as the manager of Orpen Manor and asked him to find a talented and powerful water mage. The Viscount realized that he needed to ask for help from the Tower of Mages, as the rainy season was approaching and the dam was badly damaged, all of which could cause flooding in the village and other areas. But when he came to the Tower of Mages, the young wizard informed him that there had been problems with the dam during the construction, so he had to prepare for the worst, as they had no free mages. Then Sir Copeland was upset and could not believe that there were no free water mages for such an important matter, for Orpend could not solve this problem on his own, so he turned to the capital for help. Nevertheless, realizing the complexity of the situation, the young magician suggested the Viscount to address Sir Stermel Raft directly. The problem was that the Viscount couldn't just go and ask for help, because there were many rumors about Sir Raft. Everyone knew that he had graduated from the academy with honors and had become a waterlord at a young age. The man wasn't sure if such a genius would want to help him on his own accord. Nevertheless, the Viscount went to meet him. He was worried that the young man would not even want to listen to him, but he was surprised that Stermel said that since Sir Copeland had been contacted, the matter was very complicated and decided to go there the same day. Besides, he didn't need any additional preparations as the water couldn't harm him. It was only thanks to him that heavy losses were avoided. Riken was surprised, as she was not aware of these events. The girl remembered that when her father died, Duke Sagna's personal assistant came to offer her condolences. It seemed to her at the time that it was a formal visit, since the Duke had sent him. So the Viscount told his daughter that they were acquainted but not close friends. Her father said that Stermel was an outstanding but rather cold person, but then Riken realized that the young man didn't know how to show emotion, but was willing to help those who needed it. After hearing this and thinking about it, said he wouldn't mind if she wanted a relationship with Stermel. The girl didn't understand her father, so he clarified that he wouldn't mind Stermel as her fiancé if he was the one who made her happy. He also said that although their mom would be against this relationship, but nevertheless her happiness was more important than anything else. But beyond that, the man felt that Stermel would have to prove to them that he could take care of her. When Riken finished talking to her father, she went into the room, where she was met by the maids and nanny, saying that a letter had come to her. The girl took it in her hands and knew at once who it was from. Miss Rod said that she would have to show it to her, as it was the order of the young lady's mother. Lady Copeland was hesitant to do it, but Nanny said it was all for her good. So Riken opened the envelope and flower petals flew from it. The man wrote that he was worried about her health, since they had been caught in the rain yesterday. He also said that he would be sorry if their meeting and the trip to the Tower of Mages were postponed. The young man remembered his promise to show her the method and process of creating magical tools, so he sent her an invitation to the Mage Tower. The flower petals were his answer to the lavender petals she had sent him last time, ended the letter with his signature, and saying he would look forward to seeing you. Miss Rode read the letter and realized there was nothing there to pick on. The nanny reminded the young mistress that she needed to get permission to visit the Mage Tower from her mother, Realizing that the lady was going on a date, Penny said she would give her a massage to make her look great. The maid also promised to wash the lady with rose petal water and make her a cucumber mask with honey after the treatment. And Riken realized that the maid wanted to do the same. And then the mistress suggested that her maid had fallen in love. Penny didn't want to tell yet, and Riken assumed that the girl was afraid she would separate them, but she still insisted that the maid tell the man. Penny replied that her lover was an ordinary man. Plus, he sold fruits and vegetables on the streets of Olendo and also brought them to their home. Riken had hoped that events would not repeat themselves, but it turned out not to be the case, as Penny met the very man who was older than her and who would become her husband and the father of her child. So, Riken remembered that the year she married Harold, that and Penny had gotten engaged unexpectedly, quit her job, and left the capital. It wasn't until 20 years later that Riken learned information about Penny from her elderly nanny. But to find out if Pina is happy with her husband and where they live, she never managed to find out. But Riken was certain that her maid didn't want to quit her job. The lady realized that Penny was going to marry the man she had now started dating. The thought occurred to her that perhaps she should have prevented them from building a relationship. The maid didn't understand why her mistress had a change in her face. She thought it was because of the age difference between her and her lover. But that wasn't the point, though the protagonist continued to worry about her maid's life. Riken remembered that Penny had been introduced to the man by the head maid, so she decided to check out what kind of person that man was. But she also realized that he must have had a successful business. Afterward, Riken offered to give them face masks, and then was ready to get a massage from the maid. Penny confessed that she knew the secret massage of the Principality of Belita, because if you improve the blood flow, the black circles under her eyes disappear. The maid said she would get everything ready and asked the lady to rest in the room for a while. Riken, however, realized that she wanted to see Penny always as happy as she was now. The protagonist has decided to help her maid in any way she can until she is still married. I also wanted to find out information about what a maid's beau is. After all, Riken wanted to know how her maid would live when she married and left with her husband. So Penny came back into Mistress's room and said that she would give her a facial massage now. The maid said she would apply a little pressure to her body, so if she was in pain, she would have to tell her so. Riken's face was many times fresher after the massage, which boosted her mood. Encouraged by her success, Penny offered to tidy up her mistress's hair, for she had heard of a good remedy from the servants. Riken didn't understand what was wrong with her hair, since she had brushed it and tied it up. Penny said she should have put some fragrant oil on her hair before brushing it, like roses for the van. Penny continued and said that the oil should have been applied to the ends of her hair, and only then should she start brushing it. If she did that all the time, her hair would be long and beautiful, and when she walked past someone, people would smell the scent of roses. On one hand, Riken didn't want to do it, but when she looked at Penny, she remembered her daughter and wanted to do what the girl suggested. Night had fallen. Riken was alone in the room, clutching Sir Sturmel's letters to her breast, smelling the fragrance of the flowers that came from him. Suddenly, she thought that perhaps the young man had always been so considerate of those close to him. Riken remembered that the Duke from the future never caused other people problems, so no one spoke ill of his relationship with his wife, but neither did they talk about how well they were doing. It was often said behind his wife's back that she never could get a man to love her. Others said that Sturmel didn't like women at all. All that was clear was that the man was not getting close to any girl. Yes, he respected his wife and was always courteous to her, but they were cold to each other. It was a typical marriage of convenience, so it seemed to the girl that he would not be so kind to her, for she knew of his character from the past. Now she knew she had to answer the letter and not keep him waiting long. And so the younger magician brought Sir Sturmel a letter from Viscount Copeland. He also had an uninvited guest come to him. So it was one of the aristocrats. He apologized for barging into the Mage Tower so suddenly. Although Sturmel offered tea to him, he was not obviously happy to meet him. But the man wanted to discuss some important business with the mage. The person who came said that he had received orders from the Emperor and had come to give him something. It was a gift from the Emperor, a beautiful magical blue stone. It was a brooch encrusted with a very rare and expensive blue diamond that is hard to find and impossible to buy. The man was certain that not even the aristocrats of their kingdom had seen such a beautiful piece of jewelry. Sturmel was not interested in this story, so he asked why the Emperor had given him such a gift. The comer said that it was not just done for nothing, and the king had thought it over beforehand. The guest claimed it was a show of concern. This angered the mage, for he did not believe that a man who had not recognized him or remembered him for many years decided to show care. The mage was very angry, as his father had never once visited him while he was growing up. The messenger began to lose his confidence, but tried to prove that the king was pleased to see what heights and successes his son had achieved. The young man was aware that his father would never have come to him if he had not become Lord of the Tower of Mages. Sturmel did not accept the gift and asked for it to be returned back to the emperor. He stood up and headed for the exit. A new day came, and after getting permission from her mother, Riken was already standing outside the Mage Tower. The girl had come to this place before in the future, but the occasion was a tour that was held for the parents and children of the mages. After Sir Sturmel's unexpected confession, she saw him today for the first time. The girl was so thoughtful that she did not immediately notice when Shuttermel and his assistant approached her and the nursemaid. The magicians greeted them and said that they would be shown and told everything here. The Lord's apprentice introduced himself as the water mage Gerald Maximo. The mage wanted to kiss the girl's hand and repeated that he was glad to finally see the one that made his mentor's heart beat harder, and added that he didn't have enough words to describe her beauty. But Sturmel stopped the boy from touching Riken's hand with his lips and conjured a water bubble on his head. The student got rid of the bubble pretty quickly, but Sturmel went on to say that in the presence of noble ladies, a man should behave in a respectful manner. They went to the garden where Sturmel prepared everything necessary to create a magic tool. But before starting the process of creating the item, he decided to show the girl the Tower of Mages. Meanwhile, Gerald asked Miss Rode to escort her. The woman agreed. The tower building was built with spatial magic, so it seemed taller than it actually was. But ordinary people could easily get lost here. Besides, if someone was a mage, but without a special invitation, he couldn't get into the middle. So guests were very rare here. Suddenly, a ladder of air appeared out of nowhere. Riken was a little frightened, but Sturmel said that as long as he was near her, she was safe. They began to walk slowly up the stairs to the Mage Tower. At that moment, Riken noticed that there was no one else there but them. It was true, because they were the only ones in that space, and so each mage had his own way of getting into the building. As of today, there were 420 offices in the tower. Each one was quite large, so they wouldn't be able to enter every single one of them today. To avoid confusion and use time efficiently, Sturmel often either wrote down the exact coordinates of the desired office, used spatial magic, or used magic circles. Hearing this, Riken asked if it wouldn't be easier to use one of the named methods to move. Sturmel slumped his shoulders and said he hadn't thought of that. Then the girl noticed that she couldn't see Gerald and Miss Rode. The mage said she needn't worry about the nanny, for his apprentice was beside her. But then Sturmel got a message from an apprentice, and the apprentice was saying there had been some kind of mistake, to which the mentor told him to bring Miss Rode to his office safely at all costs. Riken began to worry, but the young man replied that nothing terrible had happened, and her nanny and his apprentice had somehow gotten into a room called the Boundless Mirrors of Light. That space was often used by mages of light or darkness to practice their skills. But that wasn't the problem. It would take a normal person about 2 hours to get out of there. Besides, since it was a practice room, the other mages didn't know much about it, and Gerald was a water mage, not a light or dark mage. Riken realized that her nanny would be in that room for 2 hours. It was, and Sturmel realized that for the tour of the Mage Tower, that room was the best option. The young man thought to himself that his apprentice had been studying in the Tower of Mages for 4 years, and he could not make such a mistake by accident. The man realized that the guy did it intentionally, justifying his act by caring for him. Riken smiled. She knew that her nanny was very strict and often nagged, but when something like this happened, she would turn a blind eye and pretend it hadn't happened. But Sturmel didn't want to ruin the babysitter's opinion of himself, so he decided to do everything in his power to make sure she had a good time. And afterward, he admitted that he was even a little glad that things had worked out this way. So, they were going up further, and the young man suddenly remembered that he had heard that she had started sponsoring an unknown artist, and then asked if he understood correctly that this was the artist whose painting they had bought on their last outing. It was so. The girl confessed that she was mesmerized by the beauty of his work and was a little offended that others didn't notice it and didn't recognize his talent. She especially liked the painting Rodrigo gave her the next day. The artist's work was characterized by intense colors, dynamic strokes. It seemed that he put into his work the feelings of the person looking at it. And then, Riken remembered that Stermel also liked a particular painting by an amateur artist. That was true, but that painting was not in Stermel's possession, for he was told it was not for sale. And then he said that she took an art class, so she may have seen the painting he was talking about. He had seen his favorite painting last year at their art club show, as he happened to glance over there while he was waiting for the meeting to start. It was a painting of blue flowers, though on the other hand, he knew he had probably misidentified the color, and the flowers were most likely purple. Riken recognized her work in the painting described. Yes, she was told by a mediator that there was a man who wanted to buy her work, but she refused to sell it. Nevertheless, at that moment, she felt proud of herself as someone wanted to buy her painting, and coincidentally, that someone was Sir Stermel. The girl had no time to respond to what she heard, but the young man asked her permission to put one arm around her, as they were about to make a dash for space. She gave her consent, and magic happened. They found themselves in a long space corridor, flanked by different doors. She asked the man where they were going, for this was clearly not a garden, but it was not quite so. Stermel stood in front of one of the doors and said that behind it was the garden. He opened the door, and a veritable forest appeared in the opening. They walked through the forest, and Riken noticed that it looked quite ordinary. They walked through the woods, and Riken noticed that he looked quite ordinary. It was originally a forest in South Eld, but then one part of it was blocked off, and a passage to the Tower of Mages was made. The first mages of the Tower Land are in charge of it. Riken looked happy as it was very beautiful in this forest. The young man admired it and confirmed that it was indeed very beautiful here. They came to the lake and Stermel explained that they would create the magic tool here, as it needed a lot of clean water. He explained that the boomerang effect was easiest to control here, but that there were too many people in the city and the water needed to be spared. He then tossed a tube of purple paint into the air and cut it with a water spell. Then he cast a second spell, and Riken saw the water in the lake rise above her head in a flash. She even thought it was too much water for one tube of paint. The water spiraled around the stream of paint, changing its shape under the effect of the mage's new spell. And then a few seconds later, a beautiful purple magic gem fell into the young man's hand. He was beautiful, and the girl asked permission to touch him. The young man said yes. At that moment, Riken realized that this was the stone that Stermel would use for the cufflinks. She thought it was amazing that there was lake water inside the object. The girl didn't know much about magic, but she was sure that an ordinary water mage wasn't capable of doing something so beautiful. Stermel replied that he just had more mana, but the girl was sure it wasn't just that. The man was so free to use magic since they were inside the mage tower. He also noted that creating magic, giving it life, is not that hard. After all, if you prepare well and have everything you need with you, there is almost nothing impossible in magic. Usually, outside of the mage tower, a talent was defined as the fact that a person could create magic without much prior training. Stermel explained, in order to use magic without training, the amount of mana of the magician, the ability to grasp on the fly, and the specifics of the type of magic he possessed were important. The magician confirmed that if you prepare well and understand your desires and abilities, you can do anything your soul desires. He added that the mage tower was an isolated space, so all variables could be controlled here. Riken replied that she had always considered magic distant and incomprehensible. But after his story, she had changed her mind, and now magic was interesting and exciting for her. They were walking back and a gust of wind almost blew her hat away, but the young man reacted quickly and caught it, placing it on the girl's head. But the adventure wasn't over as a white snake crawled toward them. But there was nothing to fear. It was a common messenger of one of the mages. Snake shouted for Stermel and Riken to go back to the study as they had already made the magic tool. It was the mage's apprentice who spoke of how it would be easier for his mentor to bring a companion to the study than for him to miss road to them. Stermel, however, made it clear to his apprentice not to rush him, for he might accidentally go to the wrong place too. Gerald said quietly that it was not he who was rushing him, but Miss Rode. Riken smiled at that and asked the young man to hurry up and show her his office. After that incident, they continued to spend time together. Riken admitted that she had no idea that there were so many beautiful places in the capital. Stürmel replied that Gerald had helped him make a list of them. The young man admitted that he spent almost all of his time in the Mage Tower and never went anywhere, so he was afraid he wouldn't be able to properly escort her. It was unexpected, but it added to her strength, and she asked her companion what had happened to him the day she had come to the tower, for he had looked a little sad then. Stürmel replied that he had been visited that day by an emperor's crony. The young man said that the emperor never gave the appearance of knowing him or his mother. But on the day he became Lord of the Tower of Mages, he sent one of his underlings to greet him. But he would not accept the emperor's gift and sent it back with the man who had come. Yet he had not even the slightest idea where the power flowing in his blood would take him. Riken, on the other hand, looked at him and said that she could hardly help him in any way, but she was always willing to listen to him. So she asked him to share his fears with her, at least once in a while. They sat down on a bench, and the girl began to read the list of places Gerald had compiled for them to visit. There were a lot of them. The girl's friends from the academy often told her about half the places on the list and asked them to tell her about a place she'd like to go. Stürmel thought about it. He realized it was the off-season, and it was hard to find a good place to visit. But next spring would be a good time. He thought in advance about where he could go in the spring, because the seasons were changing rapidly. He was sure the girl would like his choice. Riken realized that this day would probably never come. And then she wondered if she could be happy in the moment, instead of thinking all day long that she missed her daughter. Would her life be okay if she let her heart flutter and have such strong feelings? After all, the problem was that she would forget that she was a mom when Sir Sturmelraft was around her. She never finished her daughter's portrait, as she had no reason to. But every time she looked at it, she began to miss her frantically. And then in her archives, she found that painting that the water mage liked. Looking at it, she thought it might be appropriate to give it to him as a parting gift. Then she dismissed the idea, as she felt that there was to be no attachment between them. For some reason, the girl felt like she was acting irresponsibly. At that moment, Penny entered the room. Riken asked her to tell the coachman to load the finished painting into the carriage. The maid was happy for her mistress. She knew that she was going to be traveling to visit Mrs. Paulinet today, and had even counted the time to stop by the house and change her outfit. Riken replied to the maid that if it had been an ordinary meeting, she could have gone along with it, but since it was a tea ceremony, it had to fit the occasion. Penny asked about whether there would be men there. Mistress replied that there would be, and then the maid whispered in her ear as to whether it would be all right for her mistress to go to such a meeting, and whether Sir Stürmel would not object to it. Riken was sure there would be no problem and asked the girl about her fruit vendor. The maid replied that they were doing well and met every weekend. Besides, he treated her well. That reassured Riken a little, but she urged Penny to tell her if he did anything she didn't like. So the tea ceremony at Polana's house was organized by her sister, Viscount Edgin's wife, the cold-blooded Olivia. When Lady Copeland entered the house, she noticed that the men had not yet arrived. But among the guests was the Earl of Wayne's daughter. Also, none of her close friends were there. The protagonist realized that Countess Wayne and the other aristocrats who gathered here had different statuses. Riken formally said hello to Viscountess Olivia, but then realized that since she was friends with her sister, perhaps she could have behaved more informally with her sister as well. Lady Wayne motioned for Riken to sit down next to them and sample the treats. The protagonist was late, for which she apologized and then asked if she had missed anything. And Lady Wayne assumed that she was referring to gossip, for example, about the Empress's sufferings. Lady Copeland was surprised that the Empress had been very ill for months. Lady Wayne said that the Empress did not want anyone outside the palace to know about her condition, so this information was kept from her subjects. This was not surprising, as Empress Isaria's coming-of-age ceremony was soon to take place. If everything went well and went according to plan, she would inherit the throne, so timing was important to the current Empress. Riken, however, realized that since they were talking about it now, the secret had failed to be buried in the palace. Lady Wayne, on the other hand, claimed that the Empress's illness was from fatigue, so the affairs of the palace were now handled by Miss Damon while the royal rested. Polana naively believed that the best doctors in Elda would be able to help their Empress. But Riken knew that the Empress would not be cured, and she would die within a year, and the Emperor would marry Stürmel's mother, and appoint her the new empress. And all this would happen before the day of Isari's majority to give his son the title. In a past life, all the events overlapped one on top of the other, and the whole country was in a state of celebration. At that moment, it seemed to the protagonist that none of this was any of her business. She was too young then, and had little life experience to understand the complexity of the situation in the country. During that period of time, she was only focused on getting Stürmel the title of Duke. But things were a little different now. Now she was not a naive girl, and could understand the feelings of the Empress, who was so distant to her then. The Empress was known to have mental health issues. In addition, she was Princess Rosalda, and after her engagement to His Majesty, she knew nothing of his history with Lady Cyrianelle. But then she learned that Lady Raph's son was the son of the Emperor, her husband. Before the princess was born, the Empress had no idea that her husband already had a son out of wedlock. Cyrianelle, on the other hand, insisted all along that her son had no father and raised the child alone without asking anyone for help. And then the Empress wanted to meet her rival, but her invitation was politely declined. Cyrianelle wrote to her that by having a child before marriage, she had tarnished her family's honor. Therefore, she has left the secular life and has no right to approach the Empress, and also asked to get into her position and not to seek any more meetings with her. Riken realized that if Cyrianelle wasn't so outstanding, she wouldn't have been able to escape the sovereign's hatred. The Empress understood that she only received her title because she was born a princess. So because of diplomatic relations, she had no right to openly criticize her husband. In the whole country, where everyone knew her, she had not a single person to whom she could open her soul. For years she had been building up hatred and resentment, which is why she soon became ill. In this situation, the one who made the mistake did not suffer in any way, but those who were abandoned suffered. Lady Wayne asked Riken about Sir Stürmel's failure to tell her of the Empress's illness. The girl replied that the man wasn't the one who should tell her that, and thought to herself that it was difficult for him to share such things with others, and he generally didn't want to get involved with the imperial family. At this moment, men entered the hall, and the Viscount immediately approached his wife. The young man also noticed that while they were gone, another beautiful lady appeared in the room. He also noticed that the girls were having a good time together. Among the men who had come in, Riken saw Harold and approached him. Since she called him by name, so the young man was very surprised and asked her if they knew each other. The girl said that perhaps they had met at the house of Baron Roland, who was very fond of gathering guests. The man introduced himself and apologized for not doing it right away, and she told him not to worry about it. Riken remembered that in a previous life, she had met him a few months after graduation when she turned 20. The protagonist didn't realize what was happening as events were unfolding faster than she had anticipated. Everyone was having a good time, but Riken told her friend that she wasn't feeling well and wanted to go home early. Riken too was beginning to realize that Harold remembered nothing of their life together in the past. She remembered his eyes, in which there was not an ounce of interest in anything, and his expression expressed hypocritical politeness. The protagonist cried in the carriage as she remembered that she had lived with Harold for a long 20 years and he remembered nothing about it. Riken didn't understand what she should do now. She suddenly realized that the future might have changed and she might not meet her daughter in the future. Now she began to fear that she wouldn't be able to meet her most favorite child in the world. The carriage stopped and Riken got out. She realized that it was winter outside now, though she had traveled back in time to when it was autumn. The girl was met at the entrance by the butler and informed her that a guest had come to see her. It was Sir Stürmel, who had been waiting for her for about 3 hours in the music room. Riken wasn't sure she wanted to meet him, but she went to the room nonetheless, realizing that Stürmel wasn't the kind of person who came to visit unannounced. The man stood with his back to the door and looked at the painting that hung on the wall, and he liked it very much. He admitted that he was quite surprised that it turned out to be her painting. The young man speculated that perhaps she didn't remember that he had already told her that this was the work he wanted to buy then, at the exhibition at the academy. Riken got embarrassed and said she was glad if he liked her painting. Stürmel, however, realized that she had known for exactly a year that he liked her work, and he would have been pleased if she had told him earlier. But now the reasons for his fascination with the picture became clear to him, all because it was authored by her, and it was rare to find anything special and beautiful in the world. The girl decided to change the topic of conversation and asked him what had happened since they had not agreed to meet. The young man explained that he had a conversation with the Viscount, but he wanted to meet her too while he was here. In addition, he informed the girl that he had to go home, as he had one very important business, so they would not be able to meet for a while. Riken asked if she'd understood correctly that he was going to go to the Raft family lands. It was just like that. He wanted to see and talk to his mother. The protagonist knew about his living situation in general terms, but assumed that everything was very complicated. In addition, Stermel had known about the Empress's illness for months. Riken realized that Stermel already knew very well that the Empress had long since been severely weakened. The young man looked at the girl and remembered that before he met her, he was going to live his life unencumbered by relationships with people. He didn't want to show his fear of the Emperor's family to any living soul. But when his mother asked him to leave the capital and return home with her, for the first time in his life, he did not follow her. All this time, it seemed to him that he was creating his own reality, a reality in which he was always running away from the imperial family and people. But now everything had changed, and his mother didn't understand him. Because at one time, she had purposely left the capital to avoid causing unnecessary problems for anyone. The woman realized that her son's studies had always been important to her, and he could also stand up for himself. But she knew that his strength was useless in the face of the evil tongues of men. The young man was well aware that people would discuss him wherever he went. He argued that leaving the capital to avoid knowing what the aristocrats here were judging was pointless, as it would be another flight, not a solution to problems. Stermel also said he knows exactly why his mother left secular society. The reason for her escape was that she wanted to preserve her nobility and not cross paths with the Empress and Emperor. But he was against defending himself in such a way. Stermel said he had no ties to his father's family. He was going to continue to ignore him to make him realize he had no son. He was unpleasant to realize, but the fact was that since he had no father, he was not considered an aristocrat. But he was not an ordinary man, so he had no country to belong to. Even so, the blood flowing in his veins was always trying to throw him off the right direction of travel. He had never thought about it until now, so obtaining the title was not set as a life goal. The young man spent his days and nights in his office in the Mage Tower, living a life that turned his back on humans and the imperial family. He was not daunted by the prospect of living like this until death, for he would have no regrets. Stermel lived all alone, shutting himself away in the Mage Tower. But what happened was that suddenly images of a completely different world began to form in his mind. A home that was cozy, warm, and peaceful. A home filled with children's laughter and a girl he frantically wanted to possess. Stermel realized that it had been a short time since he had met Riken, and the wounds that seemed incurable to him at some point began to heal. He realized that there was no telling how many feelings the human heart could hold. Nevertheless, something warm and pleasant settled inside him. He began to feel the wounds that were scarring his soul ... in an instant began to fade away. The young man realized that he wanted to continue to spend time with the daughter of the Copeland family. And so Stermel came to Riken's father with a serious conversation. The man told the guest that he wanted his daughter to live a quiet, peaceful, and happy life. Therefore, it wasn't a matter of whether the young mage could take care of it or not. The man knew that in high society, everyone ogled for status and title. But his daughter was different from the other aristocrats. He was sure that fame couldn't make Riken happy. To all this, the Viscount was well aware of the young man's situation, but he could not deny that the career successes and personal qualities of the aspirant for his daughter's husband inspired him with confidence. For that reason, he watched their relationship develop. After all, a good father would never interfere in his child's life without a good reason. Now the Viscount wanted to tell him something, even if it would sound rather rude. His daughter had family and friends and her own place in society, and Stermel, as Miss Raff's illegitimate son, was in a better position in society. The Viscount confessed that he could not allow their marriage union for the sake of his daughter's future, even if they loved each other very much. Sir Copeland realized that even if Stermel could sort out his status, it would not solve the problem, but would create a new one for his daughter. The Viscount continued by saying that they have a simple family who don't have much power and are not rich. But Stermel is destined for the title of Duke, and that makes them unequal. The man believed that the union of his daughter and the young man would make them both unhappy. Stermel admitted that he, too, worries about such thoughts. Nevertheless, he promised to find the best solution to the problem. The head of the Copeland family realized at this moment how stubborn the man in front of him was. Sturmel, on the other hand, stood in front of Riken and told her that he needed to leave for a while, but he promised to be back for her senior prom, and the girl realized that she had a strong influence on this man as well. He wanted to discuss something important with her on his return, so he asked her to wait for him. Riken realized that the young man was preparing a declaration of love for her. She wondered what would happen to her beloved daughter if she agreed to marry a magician. She was sure that her daughter was the whole world to her. These thoughts and memories made Riken cry, causing the man to question what was happening to her. He feared he had embarrassed her, but the girl began to deny it, and then wiped away her tears gently, after which he couldn't resist kissing her tenderly. And Riken, responding to the kiss, realized she couldn't refuse this man. A little later, Penny went to her mistress's room and asked her if she was all right, for she had heard her mistress crying. Riken looked at the maid and asked her to leave her alone for a bit, as she wanted to be alone for a while and think. Lady Copeland became concerned about her daughter's condition and came to the music room, where she continued to sit in complete silence. The woman informed her that it was time for dinner, and behind her back stood a maid with a tray of food. She told her daughter that she needed to eat to be as good as new in the morning. Riken ate, though reluctantly, but she ate, and her mother was glad of it, for she realized that a full stomach was better for thinking than an empty one. The protagonist suddenly remembered that when her daughter was little, she used to bring her food to bed herself too, but as the girl grew older, she began to take care of her herself. It seemed to her then that the girl had learned it from her. Now she realized that it was she who had adopted her mother's habits, not her daughter from her. Lady Copeland asked her daughter what had happened between her and Sir Sturmel when they were alone together. The main character admitted to being a little confused about her feelings and actions. The woman, on the other hand, asked her daughter about why she wasn't looking her in the eye. Riken smiled sadly, looked at her mother, and told her that it seemed to her that Sturmel would soon propose to her. The woman admitted that Sir Sturmel had come to see their father today, and they had had a long talk about something, and apparently the head of their family was not particularly opposed to this turn of events. Lady Copeland said that Sir Sturmel was an outstanding magician who would be able to make a family of his own. Riken smiled bitterly and asked her mother not to give her false hope of happiness. The girl admitted that she will refuse the young man, as it is true what they say that the first love is not successful for many people. The woman started to panic a bit and said her daughter shouldn't do that, even though she was against this marriage. Riken admitted that the young man was originally just a partner for the prom and nothing more, as she wanted to remember her prom. But then things changed. Riken was sure that she had created enough good memories, so when choosing between her daughter and Sturmel, she decided to choose her daughter, as although she liked him, she felt that everyone should be in their place. She now realized that if she had to choose between them, she could not choose her own feminine happiness and love by giving up her daughter. Riken escorted her mother to her chambers and asked her if she had a chance to be reborn. Would she live her life with her father or not? The woman admitted that she probably did, because then she would have Riken again, but she wanted to raise her but not give birth to her. Lady Copeland didn't want to go through the birthing process again, even though she had a beautiful daughter. Plus, when she was raising Riken, there were a lot of things she couldn't do as she became a first-time mom. The girl hugged her mom and confessed that she wanted to live a happy life. A few days later, she received an invitation to Baron Roland's house, where ladies and gentlemen were invited. Her mother said she could go and pick out any outfit she wanted, although in her time, girls were dressed in old dresses. As a result, they decided to go to the event together. Riken suggested to her mother that she do an Oriental-style outfit. The woman said that in her time it was considered unfashionable, but it seems that times have changed again. At this point, the mother asked her daughter if it was true that she had already met Baron Hadley. The girl smiled and said she did. The main character said she met Baron Hadley at the last tea ceremony, and then she added that he seemed to her a kind and decent man, and she would like to meet him one more time. Her mother brightened up and said that if that's what her daughter wanted, she would arrange for them to meet. The girl admitted to herself that she could not sit idly by. Riken remembered her daughter again and thought that if she didn't meet her father, she wouldn't survive it. The main character knew that there wasn't much difference between their family and Baron Haldy's family, so she could easily marry him since it happened in her past life. And so Riken went to the barony of Roland. When she entered the house, she realized that not many special people had arrived. And of the people her age, there was only Harold. And then Harold's mother came out to meet the girl. She began to say that she was very glad to see her and to meet her in person. The woman mistook the girl's reactions for malaise and noticed that she was too fragile. Riken said she wasn't sick and her health was fine, sat down in a curtsy and greeted her future mother-in-law. The protagonist could not show this woman her weaknesses, because if she finds out that she has health problems, she will be against such a daughter-in-law. But before formally introducing herself to Baroness Haldy, the girl decided to introduce herself and say hello to Baroness Roland. For this, she took a seat next to the old lady and introduced herself. The old lady said she remembered the girl as she was Grace's daughter. The landlady told the girl that she was a fine age for marriage and advised her to find a good man and marry him. All the assembled women thought that Riken was a courteous, patient girl and envied the family that would get such a wonderful daughter-in-law. Harold's mother was also impressed and thought that the girl would treat her elders well when she married. Looking at the Baroness, Riken realized one simple thing. This woman was the one person she couldn't love and accept, even back in time. Her mother-in-law was always harassing her that she could not give birth to her son and heir, although she gave birth to a daughter, and tried to please her in every possible way, cooking, for example, pies. Even in front of her granddaughter, the woman did not stop and talked about having a son after 5 years of marriage, ignoring her son's requests not to start such a conversation. The Baroness did not listen to her son and said that in all decent families, daughters-in-law did not oppose the will of their elders. The woman insisted on the birth of a grandson, as only he could continue the family business. Harold's mother did not stop. She said that Riken's type of figure indicated that she could have given birth to more than one child. The Baroness always insisted and said that raising a son was better than a daughter, and there was nothing difficult about having a second child, so they needed to be more proactive about it. Afterward, she always switched to their daughter, stroking her head and saying that daughters can be raised as good friends, and the older girls in the family always learned life early but grew up to be decent people. In addition, the woman said that the time would come when the girl would have to look for a worthy couple, and then she would leave their house and join her husband's family. And when the girl will marry, they have a headache about what to give her as a dowry. But with a son is quite different, because he can be relied on when he grows up. The Baroness insisted more and more strongly on the good news, and the girl replied that she would try even harder. Harold's sister confessed that her mother had molested her yesterday as well, and when Riken had been away for a long time, she had looked for her. Riken tried to smile, and her sister-in-law said that talking to her mother often left an unpleasant residue on her soul. And then she added that people like her mother never changed. The girl admitted that she had accepted it and was advised to take her mother for granted and tolerate it, for this is the fate of any daughter-in-law. Her husband tried to make sure she didn't know what his family members were saying about her, but something always went wrong. One evening, she caught him in a darkened room where he was drinking in proud solitude. He told her that he had heard from the butler that Shawnee, his sister, had come to visit them in the afternoon. The man admitted that he could not look her in the eye without a shadow of guilt, as both his female relatives were driving her crazy with their talk. Riken, on the other hand, was used to hiding her feelings and said that when she was with Shawnee, nothing bad happened to her. They had tea with the usual snacks. The herald claimed that he had tried very hard to make sure she didn't hear anything unpleasant. The girl thanked him for his efforts, and then added that she must live and endure. But it wasn't true that they were doing well. Shawnee admitted that her mother had insisted that Harold needed to find a second wife. The fact was that the Baroness felt that the Hadley baronetcy could not thus interrupt its existence. It was not right to cut off their lineage. But Harold answered her nothing to this statement. Shawnee, on the other hand, believed that it was better to know the bitter truth than to live in ignorance. But rather quickly, the Baroness grew old and died. She, Shawnee, Harold, and her granddaughter were with her to the very end. But in dying, the woman left behind her last will. Riken told her daughter about all this after she came of age, and she was furious. The girl couldn't believe that her grandmother had said and done such things, but she also couldn't understand how her mother had endured it all, and for what purpose. Riken persuaded her daughter not to be so categorical, because her father was not the kind of man who could have a second wife to continue the family. The protagonist justified and defended her mother-in-law, saying that she was an old-school person, and back then, girls tolerated more than that when they married. At the time, The girl had thought it was all in the past, but now she was about to go through hell again. And in the living room of the Roland house, she chatted with older ladies who thought she might have been bored with them. The Baroness suggested that Harold keep Lady Copeland company on the walk and get some air at the same time. She insisted that her son take the girl to the greenhouse, as there were beautiful roses blooming there now. The landlady allowed the young people to leave, as the girl insisted that she wanted to watch the roses bloom. They went into the greenhouse. The young man remembered that they had recently met at a tea ceremony, and now he was glad to see them again. He realized that his mother had probably caused her some inconvenience. Now the young man understood why his mother had pulled him along to the event, and Riken said that she was the first to ask her for a new appointment, so there was no inconvenience. Harold remarked that when she graduates from the academy and reaches the age of perfection, she will have no suitors. The lad realized that the girl's father would not be delighted with such a party as he, for Viscount Copeland was a distinguished politician, aristocrat, and man. Riken, on the other hand, said her father respects the young man's father for his sincerity. In her previous life, she and Harold had nothing in common. The man was interested in nothing but the family business, while she was more interested in painting. And now she realized that she had nothing to talk to him about, since she didn't understand anything about business. So she asked him what he had been doing lately, and he said business and mine affairs. He said that there were several reinas in the south which were owned by his family, and here he was engaged in making the enterprise more profitable. He was excited about the first results, and she didn't know what to say to him about it all. When she was young, she thought the man was a talented businessman. He always told her passionately about his business, and she listened to him silently, even though she understood nothing. But after a while his business failed, because he didn't have enough information and investment. It was all a mediocre bluff. He wanted to appear more capable than he really was. She knew this trait of his character and behavior better than anyone else. Be that as it may, Harold now looked quite the confident man. Now Riken was looking at the man and trying to understand what had happened to Harold from the past, what he was thinking about when he was alone. The girl realized that she hadn't really become close to him during their years together, so perhaps he was more comfortable being at the Eden with himself than with her. She kept thinking that if she had been a little better and tried harder, their family would have lived a happier life. She realized that she had been inattentive to her spouse, but nothing in the past could be changed. It also became clear to her that their daughter had a father, and his family left after she left, but Harold had no one left. The girl was overthinking things, so she had to find an excuse for her inattention in the upcoming prom. To top it all off, she was in the here and now, and her sad future where she died in the wagon accident had not yet arrived, so she needed to focus on the present. They walked into the greenhouse. It was beautiful. All kinds of flowers were blooming here, even though it was winter. Riken thought it was May here, as everything was riotously in bloom, so she contemplated creating her own greenhouse. At this point, Harold froze, and then turned to the girl and asked her if it was true that ladies liked to receive such flowers as a gift. Riken replied that that was usually the case. Girls will not like only the bouquet given to her by a man she doesn't like. Harold then asked her again if she liked the flowers. The answer was in the affirmative. The young man didn't take his gaze off the roses and admitted that he didn't quite understand what the girl above had said. And then he touched the flower and said he didn't understand why people were so fond of such impractical things. He thought that since the flowers were so amazing, they should have been priced higher, especially considering that they would wilt soon after purchase. Harold looked at the roses with deep tenderness and talked about how it would be better to save up and buy a more valuable and practical gift. And the girl realized that it was the first time she had seen him like this in 20 years. The main heroine did not know what to answer him, but then she found the words and said that the gift of a bunch of flowers is about sincere and genuine emotions and feelings. It is about joy, even though a person realizes that they will soon wither away. Riken argued that a man would be happy with an expensive gift, but still, it would not compare to the joy of the moment of receiving a bouquet. And the man suddenly realized that you should pay attention to the feelings you put into a gift. And then Riken remembered a long-ago conversation with Shawnee when she told her that Harold had a favorite girl before he married her. Then the girl didn't really believe her husband's sister and thought it was all a joke. The sister-in-law, on the other hand, said that her brother broke up with his beloved because their mother was against their union. Riken now realized that Shawnee's words were true, and the timing of the events coincided as she was to meet him later as well. To confirm her speculation, the girl asked the man if he had a favorite girlfriend and received an affirmative answer. He called his beloved an ordinary person who did not compare to Riken in any way. Lady Copeland knew that it was wrong to speak of a loved one in that way, especially if you were going against your family for his sake, but she could not say it aloud. This herald was a discovery to her. She did not know him. Riken was shocked as she realized that this was not their reality. After all, this herald has no idea of the time he spent with her and their daughter, and she has been deprived of many moments of her past life. The girl became white as chalk in a flash, so the man thought she was not feeling well and offered to go home. Riken jumped at the suggestion and said they'd better do just that. The Baron assumed he had offended her in some way, but the girl said he had nothing to do with her condition. The protagonist sat in the carriage. She realized that the present had changed, but there was no reason to worry yet. She knew even before that her husband had had a lover before the wedding, but she didn't want to cling to such trivialities, nor did she intend to. Of one thing she was sure, she had to marry the Baron and inform Sturmel of the separation. More than anything, she was afraid of making a mistake and that Harold might run off somewhere with his lover. Riken didn't know if she should win him over, and she lacked wisdom in this life as well. In general, she was looking for a reason to refuse Harold. The young mistress continued to sit in the room where Penny had entered, bringing with her a tray of tea. The maid said she added some milk and sugar to the drink. She thought that if her mistress had a little sweetness, her mood would be many times better than it was. Riken was a little surprised, so she asked Penny if she looked upset and got an affirmative answer. The main character responded to this by saying that it was both winter and cold outside, so she was a bit sad, but overall she was doing well. The maid could not calm down, so she suggested that her mistress prepare a canvas for her to paint on, as she had not yet tried the new paints, and then suggested that she call Mr. Rodrigo to keep her company. Riken smiled and asked Penny if she had time to worry about her, since today was the day she was supposed to meet her lover. The maid, on the other hand, assumed that her mistress wanted her not to go on the date. Penny was attentive, so she noticed that the lady had been sad for a few days now, and recently she had even cried. That's why I offered to beat next to the protagonist today. But Riken stubbornly repeated that she was fine, and she told the maid to go and enjoy herself. Lady Copeland also told her maid that she would have business in the evening and was going to write a letter so that she could go out in peace. But it was quite cold outside this winter, so Riken took off her silk shawl to put it on her maid. It was expensive and exquisite, so Penny was uncomfortable receiving it as a gift. Nevertheless, Riken had already tied it around her neck and said that it suited the girl very well. The maid was happy and ran to the date, and the protagonist asked her not to stay out late and then tell her how it went. Riken had finished her classes at the academy, so she had no reason to leave the castle before the prom. She held in her hand a card from Deborah, congratulating her on her graduation, and also a letter from Sir Sturmel. He wrote that he knew it was snowing in the capital, and he hoped she had enjoyed it, and was enjoying her time with friends. He himself had already arrived at the Marquis of Raft's estate, but he wanted to return home as soon as possible, even though everything in his homeland had already begun to turn white with snow. But winter had not yet fully arrived. To prove the truth of his words, he sent her a yellow maple leaf in an envelope. Also, the man was interested in the question of whether she missed him, for he missed her very much and wanted to see her. After reading the letter, the girl sat down in an armchair, without strength. At that moment, a maid came into the room and told her that dinner was ready and her mother was waiting in the dining room. In the end, she couldn't write a line to Sturmel and went to dinner. Everyone had a good meal. When the meal was over, the mother said she was going to go do some paperwork and the younger brother was going to go do his homework. The father, on the other hand, had a spare moment and wanted to have her specialty tea with his daughter. Father and daughter were left alone. She made tea, and the Viscount remarked that she had been too quiet lately. Riken smiled and replied that she was an adult and it was perfectly normal behavior. But here was the problem. She had been completely different a while ago. Afterward, he asked her about whether she had prepared everything for her graduation from the academy. But she didn't have anything to prepare, as her classes at the academy were already over and they didn't have a thesis. The prom was still an open question, but Riken had already prepared for it. The dress was already ready, and she had already been notified of the arrangements, so there was nothing to worry about. But her father asked her about a partner for the event. She didn't want to bring it up again, as she had already decided everything for herself. The Viscount understood her, but decided to clarify the situation and said that although it was difficult for him to turn a blind eye to the young man's situation, he was sure that he could take care of her. After all, in the marriage of aristocrats, it was not love that was more important, but having a title. So he couldn't completely exclude him from being a contender for her hand and heart. But the man also knew that love was also important to the happiness of a family, not just having a title. She knew it herself. But then she remembered that even without marrying, she could feel a boundless sense of love, namely a mother to her child. She still remembered the feelings she had experienced just by looking at her, and realized that she could devote her whole life to this little person. The day had worn Riken out. After tea with her father, all she wanted to do was go to bed and get some rest. And then she saw Penny in the hallway, beaten and in tears. The protagonist was a bit shocked by her maid's appearance, so the first thing she did was ask her what had happened to her. The young mistress remembered that the maid was supposed to be dating her lover. And then the puzzle in her mind came together, and it became clear what had happened to the girl in her past life and now. Penny was silent, and Riken deduced a chain of thoughts. She understood that Penny was her personal maid, but even if she had gotten pregnant, she had fled their home too hastily. She probably didn't want bad rumors about the Viscount family to spread outside the palace. But since the maid didn't say anything and just sat in the hallway, Riken decided to take her to her room to bring her to her senses. Penny would not allow her mistress to touch herself, as she thought she was dirty and that she would soil herself. Riken sat the girl down on the sofa and told her that she could keep warm here, and then began to examine her face, and noticed that she could do nothing with her shaking hands. Lady Copeland prepared water and a towel and began to help Penny wash her face. As she was washing her face, the girl noticed that the maid's cheek was reddening, which meant that a bruise was about to appear on it. Riken realized that the maid's lover had done it all, but nevertheless asked her about it to confirm her thought. The mistress began to persuade the maid to tell her the truth, for she realized that she had come to her for help, and in order to help, she needed to know how and with what to help. And then Penny started crying again and saying that she had made an irreparable mistake. The girl told me that she was very young and stupid and unmarried, but she wanted to go into a man's room, and he did, and it ended in a very sad way. The protagonist hugged the maid and told her she needed to calm down first. She ordered the girl to wash and sleep, and then they would figure out together how to find a way out of the situation. The main character tried to reassure her maid, telling her that everything would be fine as she would help solve the problems that had arisen. Riken knew very well that maids who were in a position and without a husband were dismissed from the castle and had a record made in their file, and a girl with such a record could not find a job in any decent house later on. When they arrived at their parents' house, even there they had difficulty in voicing the reason why they had been fired, and Penny apparently had no place to go back to, so she married the man who had done all this to her. The girl put the maid in her bed and began to think. She could not allow the history of the past to repeat itself. She was no longer the helpless little girl she had been then, and then she had an idea. Riken woke Penny up and ordered her to get up and put on her robe, because they had to go to a place. They went to the Tower of Mages. The main character thought that children were a blessing from heaven, but sometimes there were situations, like Penny's, where they had to be gotten rid of. The aristocrats found a secret way to do it and shared it only in confidence among themselves. They arrived and got off the carriage. Riken noticed that her maid didn't look very well, but asked her to bear it a little longer. At that moment, the maid noticed that another noble lady had come to the place. In this noble lady, Riken recognized Baroness Haldi. This raised a lot of questions in the girl's mind, as she had no idea what she was doing here. But she told Penny that she shouldn't worry. No one would recognize them. As soon as the girls entered the Mage Tower, a student of Sturmel's came out to meet them and asked Riken what she was doing here in the early morning, if she wanted to contact his mentor. Lady Copeland replied that she needed a blood mage. This caused surprise on the young mage's face, but according to the tower's rules, he had no right to ask her unnecessary questions. It was clear enough, though. They needed a special potion to terminate a pregnancy. Gerald led them into a special living room and asked them to wait a while. Riken never imagined that the gossip and secrets she would hear in social circles would come in handy in real life. The protagonist realized that her maid was in quite a lot of pain right now, but she tolerated it and apologized to her for it. And then she told the maid that until last night, she was sure she would let the girl make her own decision. But yesterday things had changed, and now she would not stand by. Riken insisted that that fruit vendor was no match for her maid. Penny cried and said that her lover had sworn to her that he loved her. But Riken wasn't so sure about that, since last night he had just taken to beating the girl. But if he loved her, he would never in his life raise his hand to her and give up something against her will. The maid blamed herself but not him, but Riken insisted that she was not to blame, that the fault lay entirely on the man's shoulders, and that the girl was a pure and blameless soul who had strayed. The mistress also assured the maid that she would be against her marrying that fruit seller. Now Penny wept at her mistress's kindness and promised to follow her everywhere and always, even when she married, and to always be at her side. They hugged and thanked each other for supporting them in their time of need. At that moment, an elderly mage came out to them and asked if they were looking for a blood mage. Riken apologized to the old man for having to wait while they talked. The mage, however, felt it would be inappropriate of him to barge into the room and interrupt their conversation, especially considering the fact that one of the girls was crying. The protagonist was very much surprised as she expected to meet a magician who sells magical medicines. But one of the simplest mages in the tower came to meet her. He said that sometimes when he can't sleep, he works here. Riken wasn't familiar with the man, but knew full well that he held a high position in the mage tower and was the kind of person who didn't like to show his face in public. He realized at once that the lady was not looking for a blood mage for herself, but for her companion. This was so because the protagonist assumed that her maid was pregnant, so they needed a special medicine. The old man was a time mage and began to conjure immediately when he realized the reason for the girl's arrival. During the sorcery, Penny fainted, but the magician explained that he was just putting her to sleep because the whole procedure could be painful for her, and this way she would feel better. He also said that whatever was inside the girl's body would disappear as if it never existed. Riken was worried about the safety of this method. The old man said it was much better for the body than poisoning it with poisonous drugs. He thought that in such situations, magic was the best solution to the problem. But there were not many specialists in the tower ready to help not with medicine, but with magic. Riken thanked him and asked him to keep their visit a secret. This was already clear, as there was a rule in this place: anything that happened in the mage tower stays in the mage tower. The man was silent for a moment, and then asked the lady if she had come here at this hour for her maid. Then he added that she was a very thoughtful girl. Riken was convinced that you should always help people in need, especially if they are your loved ones. The girl wanted to do her best for Penny, as she was her closest servant. Lady Copeland asked the magician when Penny would wake up. He replied that there was no need to rush things, and they still had time for a cup of tea, and began to conjure. Riken had never seen anything like this before in her life, but since she was in a place like this, she shouldn't have been surprised by what she saw. For a moment, she clearly realized that the wizard wanted to talk to her about something. The man admitted that he was very curious to know what kind of person she was. After all, she was far more famous in the Mage Tower than the princess of their country. The older man admitted that he had assumed and even believed that after Sturmel became lord of the tower, he would move it to the sea or ocean far away from here. That this grown child would want to see his father's face full of despair. But the young man outwitted everyone again and got the title to become part of the secular society. Riken realized where the man was going with this, but said that the man was mistaken and Sturmel didn't do it because of her. She was sure of what she was saying based on previous experience, for then the young man had done the same thing, accepted a title and entered secular society. She understood that a little more time would go by and he would tie himself in marriage to another girl. But here she had no idea if she would be able to accept with a smile on her face and honor the event. Now it was the girl's turn to ask questions, and she asked about whether she had correctly realized that he was a time mage. The old man confirmed it, noting to himself her observation. She had seen his watch glowing during the spell, and assumed that it was the one he used as a carrier of magic. This was not new to her, as she had known a time mage in a previous life. This was a curious twist in the conversation, as the mage assumed the girl was talking about the person who had put the time protection on her. This was the first time Riken had ever heard of such a thing, so the mage told her that time protection meant that one received protection from some magical attribute. You don't need to have an outstanding talent for this spell, as something similar mages have often used to protect themselves from the effects of the magic they themselves use. But it is quite another thing when a mage puts such a defense on another person. It can only mean that he has tremendous power. But he was the only time mage in the mage tower, which meant that the girl had gotten her protection from another master and in another place. Only now did Riken begin to realize that someone had cast time magic on her. The problem was that in all his long practice in life, the man had hardly ever seen time magic used on a human in this way, especially when there was no reason for it, as in Penny's case. At that moment, he noticed that the girl had turned pale, but she said she was fine. But she was beginning to realize that only one person could have done time magic on her, her daughter. And that was something she didn't want to believe. Riken thought that it was not for nothing that her daughter had said that she should live as she wished when she was reborn. For she had planned from the beginning to take her to the past. That day as she was dying, she heard the sad voice of her child at her bedside. She was brought out of her musings by the voice of the mage. He said she didn't look well, but the girl assured him she was fine. Riken admitted that there were no high-level mages among her acquaintances capable of such magic. Nevertheless, the older man was sure that the girl already had some guesses as to who might have done such a thing. The old man added that this was not an interrogation, but his simple curiosity, as he was very interested in the matter. He also said that it was common to see blood mixing in aristocratic families, so a person might not even feel that a magical reaction was happening to them. Nevertheless, one shouldn't worry too much about it. When Penny woke up, they drove home. They were met at the front door by Miss Rode. She asked indignantly where the girls had gone earlier that morning, but Riken assured her that nothing special had happened, even though she didn't look her best. And then Miss Rode began examining Penny's face, who had a black eye, and asking her what had happened to her already. Seeing the situation, Riken sent Penny off to rest. The girl kept apologizing to her mistress for her oversight, and she told the nanny that since they were both up all night, but were very tired and needed sleep, and they would think about the details tomorrow on a fresh head. But Miss Rode didn't give up. She wanted to know what had happened to Penny. Plus, she had to report something like this to Lady Copeland. But Riken said she would tell her mother herself, but later. The girl took off her clothes and lay down in bed, asking the nanny to leave her alone in the room. Riken shivered and began to think. She couldn't believe that her displacement into the past could have been the work of her favorite daughter. But she spent her whole life thinking her girl's level wasn't that high. She could make a Frisia not wilt for a long time. She said she studied hard. She was best at stopping the time of subjects. For example, she once showed her how she could stop the time of a running kettle, and when her grandmother was coming to meet them, she made the flowers stop wilting. Riken saw the usefulness of her daughter's magic in everyday life. Sometimes she was wrong. Besides, the scope of her magic was also quite limited. And if you compared her magic to the magic of other wizards, it wasn't that unique and powerful. The question now was how she could bring Riken back to the past. It occurred to the protagonist that perhaps her daughter was hiding her true powers and abilities. Riken suddenly realized that in her child's eyes her life looked very bad, boring, and miserable. It was hard to call her the happiest person in the world, but definitely not the unhappiest either, as every day she spent with her daughter was filled with warmth and joy. For example, such was the day a little girl took her first step without her help, or how sweet and delicious the tea was that they drank after a fight in the living room, and she was mad at Riken, and the room smelled like fragrant roses. The main character couldn't understand why her daughter didn't feel it all, see it all, or understand it all. After all, Riken's life was filled with meaning and joy after the birth of her baby girl. Yes, her father was not a prince on a white horse, but her daughter was her princess. Riken got out of bed and walked over to the flowers that stood on the table. A gift from Sturmel. They had wilted. The girl was worried. She realized that the flowers had wilted because of her, and she had gotten close to him on a whim. She sat down at the table and took out a piece of paper for a letter. The protagonist realized that she had to marry Harold at any cost, but nevertheless, she couldn't stop thinking about Sturmel. Her bitter tears cried onto a piece of paper. She wrote to Sturmel that what she wanted to tell him would embarrass him and likely offend him. The girl slipped a note into the bird's beak and sent it to him, writing that she was grateful to him for accepting her invitation to the prom. But now she wanted to pretend that none of this had happened and was going to live with the memories of him in her heart. And then, under the weight of the pain of her shed tears and broken heart, she fell to her knees, staring after the magical bird that had flown away. Meanwhile, Stürmel was at his grandfather's manor, talking to him. The old man knew that a messenger from the king had visited his grandson not so long ago. The mage was a little surprised that his grandfather knew of this event. Marquis explained to his grandson that he has eyes and ears not only on his head, but wherever necessary. Marquis Raft said that his men were everywhere and that they were not one or two people. And then he laughed and asked his grandson if he thought he was aware of all the events of the Elda lands only. Cyrionel was well aware of her father's unconventionality, so she didn't seem surprised. But the woman still didn't understand why her father would need so many spies. After all, she hadn't been outside the castle in a long time. The old man, however, thought there was nothing wrong with vigilance, for he knew that the enemy of his daughter and grandson was none other than the king of their country. After a moment, the Marquis asked Stürmel what the king had given him. The latter replied that it was a very valuable treasure, but he did not accept it and sent it back. Stürmel didn't like such a gesture, as he thought that if the emperor wanted to claim his rights as a father, he should have come in person. But he didn't and received this kind of response. The young man was worried because his status was still in question. Even when he became the Lord of the Tower of Mages, people around him didn't stop talking about it. Therefore, he was going to make every effort to clarify the matter. Thus, he decided to take the title of Duke and enter the world of aristocrats. Grandpa didn't expect this turn either, as up until this point, for many years, Stürmel had shown no interest in titles, power, or anything else. Cyrionel was also alarmed, for though she realized that this was a step her son would have to take sooner or later, she feared he was in a hurry and might make a mistake. And Marquis Raft seemed to understand the reason for this decision. He assumed that Stürmel wanted to accept the title because of the girl he was dating. This was unexpected news to Lady Raft, so she questioned her son if what her father was saying was true. The old man knew that gossip didn't travel very far in high society, but there were people who knew about it. So, the Marquis was told that his only grandson, the Lord of the Mage Tower, was serious about Viscount Copeland's daughter, Raken. On one hand, grandfather understood that Viscountcy Copeland had its own traditions, and the head of the family was an outstanding man. But if you looked at the status of the family, he didn't reach them, so it would be better for his grandson to choose a princess as his wife. On the other hand, the Marquis was not surprised that his grandson had chosen a girl from an ordinary Viscount family. Nevertheless, Grandpa insisted that Stürmel be given a title that would be commensurate with his position and ability. The young man had made up his mind. He was not going to give up what was rightfully his, though he was not particularly interested in power. He didn't want to be treated like a weakling who could be cornered. His mom, on the other hand, was concerned about whether or not he really had a favorite girl he was dating. Stürmel admitted that this was true, though it had begun not so long ago. He liked and admired everything about her, and also he was always cozy and calm around her. He decided to propose to her as soon as he solved his status problem. Cyrionel was happy for her son as she realized that he had chosen a good person to be his life partner. He decided that as soon as he was back in the capital, the first thing he would do would be to ask for an audience with the princess and swear an oath to her while asking for a title for himself. He did not see the point in a lavish receiving ceremony, so he thought that 2 or 3 weeks would be enough for him. The Marquis realized that his grandson wanted to do everything himself. Stürmel said he would ask the Master of the Tower of Mages for help, as there were certain nuances of when a mage received a title. Cyrionel understood her son's reasons for undertaking all this and the reasonableness of his arguments, but she feared that he would make some mistake in his haste. The young man listened to his mom and then said that he concluded from her serious tone and what she was saying that she thought he was stupid. Plus, he had promised Lady Copeland that he would go with her to the prom from the academy, as it was an important event for her. He worried that she would be uncomfortable around a man whose status was undefined. The young man was very much worried about it, as he did not want to harm his beloved in any way. Cyrionel and Marquis Raft realized that their precious child had grown up, for as a child he had often made them worry about him, But today his voice sounded different, stronger. At that moment, Stürmel felt magic and went to the window, seeing the canary and realizing that Riken had sent it out at dawn. After reading the letter, the young man changed in his face, which frightened his relatives. And then he made the decision to return to the capital immediately. Riken was very worried. She kept having the same dream in which she welcomed spring with Stürmel. It was really weird. I mean, they started dating when it was cold outside. At that moment, when the girl was just coming to her senses after sleep, her younger brother ran into her room screaming. The nanny tried to calm him down, but she couldn't. He kept saying that his sister hadn't eaten anything for a long time. Mac repeated that his sister didn't look well and asked her if she was really sick, ignoring the fact that this was very impolite behavior. The boy dumped the sweets on his sister's bed and said she must eat it and ran away, though Miss Rode told him that the food that was on the bed was not to be eaten. The girl took one candy that her brother had brought, but realized that she didn't have the energy to eat it all. Miss Rode understood that Mac was very worried about her sister. She herself was worried too and touched her forehead. But there was no fever, and the girl said she was fine. It was just hard and dreary, but once she got some rest, she should feel better. The nanny reports to Riken that her mom is very worried about her condition. When Riken heard that, she promised to get dressed, go get something to eat, and check on her mother. Besides, she knew she didn't have to wait for Penny, who came every morning to tell her that the bath was ready. Then she asked Miss Rode where Penny was. She said the girl had gone to the head maid's, but she had promised to be back before Riken got up, but she hadn't shown up yet. The lady didn't understand why the head maid would call for her personal maid. Then she realized what was going on and asked Miss Rode to find Penny immediately and bring her here. Riken insisted that the nanny do it right away, and she herself was going to go see her mom to say hello. But since she couldn't go in her pajamas, she asked the nanny to send someone to help her get dressed. The woman did not understand this change in her mistress's behavior, but went to do the errand. The protagonist realized that the case was quite strange, as she knew that Penny had little contact with the head maid. That's because the maid spent most of her working hours with Riken, and the head maid managed the other servants who did other chores around the house. But Riken paced the room and pondered until a young maid appeared in the doorway and said that Miss Rode had sent her here. The lady approached the maid closely and asked her if the head maid often introduced young maids to a very good man. Meanwhile, in addition to Penny, the man who had beaten her was in the head maid's room. He asked what had happened to her and said he had to take responsibility for the act. The head maid saw that the girl only kept silent, so she said that the man should leave now and she would take care of everything. He also handed her silver coins in a pouch as a token of gratitude. The woman took the payment and told the man to hurry up and leave the house. As the man was leaving the estate, he crossed paths with Miss Rode, who did not remember him and was surprised that he walked here as if he were at home. Penny told the head maid with a note of resentment that she had only come to see her because she thought she was alone. The woman tried to persuade the young maid that it was all her fault, that she should take responsibility, because such good men were not on the road. The head maid insisted that she would speak to the mistress, but Penny struck a pose and said that the young mistress would not allow her to marry so easily. The girl said loud and clear that she would not marry that man because he had beaten her, but the woman kept insisting on the marriage, saying that Penny couldn't abruptly cut things off like that. Penny said that her decision had nothing to do with the head maid, and in general, Riken said that she shouldn't marry a man who raised his hand to her since it wasn't love, so she decided to stay by her side since she believed her unconditionally. At that moment, Miss Rode entered the room. The head maid did not understand what brought the nanny here, as this part of the duties did not belong to her. Miss Rode reported that Lady Riken was expecting them both at her place, and then remarked that there was an uneasy atmosphere in the room. The maids had no choice but to go with Miss Rode, who led them straight to Riken. The girl asked the women to come in. It was strange that she had called the butler to this meeting as well. The head maid realized that Riken had found someone who was on her side and tried to act like the mistress of this house. She sent Penny straight to her room and asked her to clean it up. Looking at the head maid, she said that she felt terrible, so they would not be revisiting the matter a second time. The girl got straight to the point and asked how well the woman knew the fruit vendor to match him up with Penny. The head maid tried to pretend she didn't know what she was talking about, but Riken said it would be better for her to tell the whole truth here and now. The girl said she had heard from the butler that she was the one who introduced the young girls from their house to all sorts of nice people. The woman claimed that she did what was best for the girls and only introduced them to people who were of good character. Now it was clear to the young mistress how the head maid had attracted various merchants to cooperate with their house. It was now becoming clear that this woman had brought a man she knew from work and had matched him with her personal maid. Riken thought it was unacceptable and abnormal that a woman, hiding behind her identity, had brought someone she didn't know to meet Penny. Nevertheless, the girl recognized that it was quite a smart move. To top it all off, everyone in the house knew and told her that this was not the first time the head maid had introduced young girls to men. Two of the maids kept talking about getting married soon, but it didn't happen. One of them returned to her home country afterward, the other quit for unknown reasons. But this time, the head maid had to work hard to light this man with her personal maid, and he is none other than her personal benefactor. The worst part was that the woman wasn't just paid for this deal. Riken was even curious as to how much the woman was asking from her clients for setting up naive and foolish maids with obscure men. The head maid tried to protest, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." Lady Copeland said that she would be glad if it were true, for if a woman was related to a man who had harmed Penny, she would be in big trouble. But it was clear to everyone in the house that Penny's face wasn't lying about what had happened to her. It upset Riken so much that she couldn't even eat. It became a matter of honor for the protagonist. She couldn't sit idly by when her subordinate returned to her like this. The girl admitted that she was worried about the state of affairs in the house, for she knew that it was the duty of the head servant to train and supervise the other servants. Riken, on the other hand, wanted all the maids in her house to be able to build healthy relationships with good men and not get into situations like this. The protagonist was disturbed by the fact that many of the female workers in their house had been here recently, but after not working for long periods of time, they were disappearing, or rather quitting for strange personal reasons and leaving their estate. This all indicated that there was a problem in their house. And things could get even worse if people outside the mansion started talking about these strange coincidences. And if that were to happen, her mother would be the first to suffer, as it was her responsibility to keep an eye on the servants. It was also clear that her mother's reputation would suffer from all this, as people would start gossiping about her failure to supervise the work of the servants, and soon she herself would suffer from the scandal. And since her mom trusted the head maid so much, Riken didn't want her to get in trouble. She looked at the head maid in a way that made her reluctant to contradict her. Riken didn't hesitate to say that her maid's problems were her problems and hoped that something like this wouldn't happen again. Afterward, Riken let the woman go, ordering her to go to work. The head maid bowed and left. After the culprit left the room, the protagonist asked the butler to pass the information about that man to her father to break the contract with him quickly. The girl thought it was too degrading for their house to deal with a man who raised his hand against weak women. Riken also hinted to the butler that she didn't want to accidentally meet that man somewhere in the capital. The butler bowed and said that he understood. The servant said he would give everything to the Viscount, and it would be as she wished. Miss Rode looked at the girl and began to worry about Penny, but Riken assured her that the maid was perfectly fine. Riken said that Penny managed to get away from that man when he ran out of strength, though before he did, he slammed her head against the wall. Miss Rode said that since this case involved Lady Copeland's honor as well, she would keep it all confidential. To that end, she promised to get a healer she knew to come and privately treat Penny's wounds. In Riken's room, the maid heard the whole conversation from beginning to end and wept bitterly. The lady asked her to stop crying, for her eyes might be swollen shut too. Lady Copeland asked Penny to stop apologizing, since she had only been able to drive that man out of the capital and nothing else. But the maid was immensely grateful for her help. The maid confessed that she was very scared, because the man she liked very much had turned into a criminal. She said that she was so frightened that she was unable to say anything to the face of her abusers. The lady reassured her by saying that it was the most common and normal human reaction to those circumstances. Riken hugged the maid and thanked her for the girl being able to take it all and stay by her side. Next, Riken went to meet with her mom. Grace said that she was very worried about her and thought she was sick, especially when the facts of the story with the head maid became known to her. The woman trusted her daughter but feared she might have passed out from the stress, but Riken replied that she wasn't as weak as she might think. Her mother knew that her daughter was a very caring person, so she never interfered in her affairs. Viscountess Copeland said she knew that Riken treasured Penny, but she didn't think so much as to even involve the butler in the matter. Riken admitted that since she had no older or younger sisters, she treasured her maid. Plus, the actions of the head maid could hurt their family, so she needed to be dealt with immediately. Lady Copeland was in agreement with her daughter and informed her that the head maid would soon leave their house, for she had betrayed her trust. And then she apologized to Riken for being so busy with other things and issues that she hadn't kept track of the woman. Riken reassured her mother, saying that she wasn't hurt, but she was very worried about Penny. The mother hugged her daughter. Riken's only worry was whether she was doing the right thing in this life. The girl seemed to be doing a lot of things wrong lately, and she didn't have the rightness in the decisions she made. Nevertheless, she asked her mom not to worry about her, as she is sure to handle everything. Grace stroked her daughter's head and told her that she shouldn't worry so much as there would come a point when it would pass. The girl realized that she had to put an end to everything, and whether she succeeded or failed, there was no such thing as a perfect life. She realized that if she died that day, time would heal her daughter's soul. In her own time, however, she was able to overcome the sadness and pain of her parents' deaths because she was able to stand by her daughter's side and hug her when she got married. She believed then that there might come a time when her daughter would have her baby and walk with her, smiling and happy. Riken realized now that she had made a mistake. But even after wasting so much time, she was going to do her best to meet her girl from her past life. At that time, something incredible began to happen outside the window. A hurricane was coming. Miss Nord suggested closing the windows so that her young mistress could sleep in peace. Besides, the food was almost ready, but Riken decided to excommunicate herself from the room for a bit. Today, the girl wanted to go to bed early and didn't want to eat at all, even though the nanny asked her to eat at least a little. Riken asked the nanny to stop worrying about her as she was feeling fine, just had all sorts of sad thoughts going through her head. It began to rain. The girl went to her room and wondered whether the bird with the letter had reached Stürmel. The protagonist was well aware of the magician's magical abilities, but the distance between their estates was vast, so it could have gotten lost somewhere. She had no idea what she would do if Stürmel appeared in front of her as if nothing had happened, smiled and extended his hand to her. She didn't like to think about that scenario, but as soon as she entered her room, she saw Stürmel standing at the window waiting for her. He looked at her worriedly and asked about her pain as she changed in her face when she saw him. Riken asked how he had gotten here. The young man apologized to her for entering her room without permission. He admitted that he had wanted to visit her officially, but was afraid that she did not want to see him. He admitted that the hurricane was his doing, since you could travel many times faster through the air, and then he handed her a magic bird and asked her what her letter meant. The young man took a step towards the girl and asked her if she was afraid of him, but he received a negative answer. But since that was true, he didn't understand why she had that look on her face. The girl admitted that she had just gotten very cold standing in the draft. Riken said she had written everything she wanted to say to him in the letter the canary brought him. The girl said she asked him to forget about asking him to keep her company at the prom. Stürmel couldn't understand, could he? That everything that had happened between them over the months remained only on a piece of paper. She lowered her head and said yes. That's what she really wants. The young man asked her what he had done wrong that she wanted to break their bond. He urged her to give him an answer so he could fix it. The girl said it was not his mistake. Riken cried and admitted that she couldn't take much more. Stürmel began wiping her tears, saying she was crying just like last time. Suddenly, he realized clearly that she had wanted to break up with him during their last meeting before he left. The young man remembered their kiss and did not understand why she had responded to it. And now he asked her if there was a fear in her heart that he would propose to her. He looked at her and wondered if she really wanted to cut him out of her life, even after all the time they had spent together, walking, dancing, holding hands and laughing. She replied that wasn't the reason. Then he suggested that it was because he was a child out of wedlock. He didn't believe that was the reason he could no longer be her lover. Stürmel realized it hadn't been that long since they first met, but every day they spent together gave him happiness. He had never experienced anything like this before meeting Riken, strangely enough. But in those moments, his heart was filled with warmth. The young man was well aware that it was not easy to be happy all the time, but with her, it seemed to him that it was possible. So he made every possible and impossible effort to try and make each of their days happy. and now his rosy dreams and hopes were shattering on the rocks of reality. He looked at Riken and asked her if, because he was a bastard son, he was not allowed to be her lover. Her silence he took as agreement and turned away, realizing it was only his problem. The young man realized that he had made the decision to accept the title for her sake, but she had not asked him to do so, so he had no right to blame her for anything. At that moment, Riken felt a very deep sense of guilt, as she realized that she had hurt the man she loved very badly. She realized that she should have ended their relationship sooner. The girl was well aware that everything should have been stopped earlier before they held hands, called each other by name, kissed. After all, everything that had happened was the result of her greed. Now the situation was worse than ever. But Riken looked away and said that she was still sure that neither he nor Miss Raft had done anything wrong, and they should not blame themselves or bow to the gossipers. Besides, she had her own completely different problem that had nothing to do with Sturmel, but which she couldn't go against. She knew more than anyone that he would become the Duke of Sagna, a man she had no right to even think about touching. The girl realized that she shouldn't fall in love with him even more. After all, if she was sad when she looked at him from afar, and if at any time she felt weak because of it, she would never be able to forgive herself. Now she could tell him the truth, and she was doing so. The point was, she hadn't even planned to hang out with him originally, and even after he'd agreed to accompany her to the prom. After the prom, she'd planned to stop seeing him. Besides, the day she had invited him to the events, the girl had been sure he would turn her down, but now, though she wasn't brave and strong enough, she wanted to run her life on her own. Riken also planned to get married, live a measured lifestyle, and continue to socialize with her friends and family. Sturmel couldn't believe his ears, and Riken continued. She said she was born into the Viscount's family and lived as his daughter all her life, so she never dreamed or wanted more. The young man lowered his head and mouthed that she had long known of his status and that he was going to receive the title soon. And then he added that even though he said he was going for the title, he could still change his mind. But seeing that she remained silent, the young man swore to her by the Tower of Mages that this or anything else would not harm her. Riken, on the other hand, asked him not to change his plans because of a girl like her. The magician admitted that he was only doing all of this to build their happy future together, where they could hold hands and go on shoulder to shoulder. Riken thanked him for these kind and full of feeling words, but she could not become his wife, as she had her own personal reasons for that, and her life was full of problems. The protagonist was glad she had the opportunity to apologize to him in person, but the man didn't want an apology. He wanted to hear something else. For the first time in the entire conversation, the girl looked him straight in the eye and told him that she would become the Baron's wife. Riken wanted to be neither rich nor poor and to live in peace. She agreed that her heart would not flutter with another man and that there would be no great love between them. But nevertheless, she was going to give him a baby and then devote her whole life to this little miracle and wait for her daughter to give her a grandson or granddaughter. Riken cried but went on and said that she would live this particular life and then tell her grandchildren about events from her youth. She realized that her strength was at its limit, but she knew perfectly well that if she had a daughter, she would endure everything, so she apologized to Sturmel and said that it was time for them to go their separate ways. Sturmel was killed by her words and attitude, for she had destroyed everything inside him and forced him to give up on her. But if she had no feelings for him, how could he force a girl to be with him? He realized now that she didn't want him, so he apologized and stepped into the emptiness and darkness of the night and the rain, and Riken remained standing on the balcony, staring where her beloved man had stood a moment ago. No matter how his relationship with Riken turned out, he decided not to give up on his plan and met with the princess. The girl looked at him and asked him why he had changed his mind and decided to get the title. The princess didn't know what he was up to, since he made such an abrupt decision to return to the capital. But the young man admitted that he needed to gain more power and solidify his status, even if she thought it was his whim. The girl realized that it would be a big mistake to call the Lord of Water and Wind a capricious child. He promised his sister that he would not fight her for the throne. Her Highness noted that the title of Duke of Sagna is one of the optional existing titles in the Elda Empire. The young man knew very well that his title had no connection to her claim to Empress Elda's seat, so it wouldn't be a problem for her. So the Lord of Water and Wind asked his sister to grant him the title and live in peace. The princess understood the reasonableness of her brother's words and replied that if she had the opportunity to help him in this matter, she had no reason to refuse. But after a short pause, she inquired how Lady Copeland was doing. Shadurmel's face turned into a mask, and he said that the princess had nothing to worry about. The young man reiterated that he had no plans to become emperor, so he was not interested in the succession to the throne as before. And then he added that he would not have a child who could inherit the throne in the future. When the princess heard this, she realized that this turn of events was only to her advantage, and the reasons did not matter to her. Shturmel finished talking to the princess and remembered the dialogue with his teacher. The old man had asked him if he was really going to get the title of. The young man then replied that he was just tired of hiding it all and lying to himself, and it was now his conscious choice, unrelated to specific individuals. The time mage didn't expect his student to think that he had spent his entire realized life fooling himself. But Shturmel didn't have a clear and unambiguous answer to that question. His mentor knew for sure, for he had been watching his best student closely for a long time and had realized one thing about him. He was not interested in power, titles, and palace intrigues. The time mage couldn't believe that Shturmel was being serious now, so he asked him about whether the man had forgotten that he was going to use the title to get rid of his weakness and become stronger. The old man understood that the Waterlord wanted Riken to look at him from a different angle and acknowledge him. At this point, Shturmel realized that his mentor knew more than he was saying, but the old man wasn't about to reveal all the cards. He was curious as to when his student would grow up, but took pity on him and gave him a hint, asking if he really thought the girl had turned him down because of his title or his status. The time mage didn't understand if the young man really believed that Riken would accept him if he gained a title, or even became the emperor of Elda himself. Or she would have accepted him if he had been given the title not of Duke, but of Harrow. But did she not say that it did not matter, and the reasons for the refusal were quite different? At that moment, Shturmel thought his mentor knew Riken too well. He smiled and said that he had once been curious about the girl the Lord of the Tower of Mages had fallen in love with. The old man admitted that he had met many different people on his life's journey, but not all of them had awakened in him an interest in getting to know them better. The old mage knew that most people are enamored with their wants and needs, but there are those who find deeper things important. After all, the same could have been said for Shturmel. Realizing that he needed advice, the young man asked his teacher how best to proceed. The advice was simple. Shturmel should try to understand other people's problems rather than focusing on his own. And then, when he encountered other people's problems, to think about how he could help solve them. But telling everything here and now was not something the old man was going to tell his apprentice, as it wouldn't do him any good. Now Shturmel stood in the cold rain and realized that his mentor was right, and he needed to understand what kind of problem was tormenting Lady Riken's heart. The young man realized that although the girl had told him that she wanted to become a baroness, she didn't look happy about it. In his thoughts, Shturmel arrived home. When he got out of the carriage, the first thing he did was to ask the servant if there were any letters to his name, and he said there were none. It was even a good thing. Afterward, the young man said he needed to change his suit because he had been caught in the rain. The servant said he would get everything ready. But before Shturmel entered the house, the butler said that Lady Scylla and her friend had come to visit him, and they were waiting for him in the drawing room. This news didn't make the mage happy, as there were so many living rooms in the house, so he didn't understand why the girls came to his, though on the other hand, Scylla was his cousin, so he shouldn't have been surprised. Nevertheless, for him it posed additional problems, for he wanted to rest as he was very tired. As soon as he crossed the threshold of the room, Scylla ran towards him, but the young man did not share her ebullient enthusiasm, though his sister had invited him to have a cup of tea with her and her friend. Scylla's friend turned out to be Kylie Wayne, who looked at the magician enthusiastically and greeted him politely. Kylie introduced herself and said that Scylla had invited her to the tea ceremony, so she agreed to come. She said that if Sir Shturmel could give her a little of his time, she would be very happy. But the man interrupted her sharply. He said he had been caught in a heavy rain on his way home and was soaked, so he thought it would be very impolite of him to appear before the ladies in such a manner. and then added that since she was Scylla's guest, she didn't need to pay her attention to him. The girl was silent and did not know what to answer to such a thing, so Scylla took matters into her own hands and began to ask her cousin to give them at least a few minutes to talk. And on the whole, she thought he had spoken rather rudely to her friend. But Stermel said that he could not honor her request, for he still had important business to attend to that could not be delayed. Scylla realized that she wouldn't be able to change her brother's mind, so she offered to have dinner with him. But this attempt failed as well. The mage asked her to ignore him, since it was her sister's house in general. He then wished the girls a good time in each other's company, turned around and left the room. Lady Kayla was silent for a long time. Then she squeezed the edge of her dress, for she was very much upset, and told Scylla that she had some urgent business left at home that she had forgotten about, and it was time for her to go home. After Lady Wayne left their home, Lady Raft burst into her brother's study, tearing him away from his papers. Stermel looked at his cousin and asked her if their guest had already left. The girl stood across from him and said that Kylie had left as soon as he had gone to his room, citing household chores. Scylla, however, was beginning to get angry, for her cousin had nearly brought her friend to tears again, for he had overdone it this time by interrupting Lady Wayne abruptly. The mage didn't understand what the deal was this time, since he always talked to Scylla's girlfriends when they started talking to him and showing interest in him. But since his sister was upset, he thought he'd better apologize. To which the girl replied that it wasn't his fault in the whole thing, and he shouldn't have apologized. The cousin knew very well that many girls in their circle liked her brother, and many of them had tried to talk to him, but this time he had misunderstood the situation a bit, so she wanted to explain everything to him now. Stermel didn't want to have a long conversation on the subject, so he said he was so abrupt because he was going through a difficult and important period that would radically affect his future, so such awkward encounters were not for him. Scylla smiled. She knew what he meant, so she said she'd be much more careful from now on. Then the girl came to him and sat on his lap. She asked him if it was true what her mother had told her that next spring he would leave their home and live independently and independently of them. The young man crossed his arms and said that yes, when he gets the title he plans to start a family of his own, so he will have to leave as he can't live his whole life at the expense of Raft's family. Scylla knew he was saying the right things, but she still wanted to live with him. She then added that none of the relatives thought he was living off the family on everything, but since her brother had decided to leave the palace anyway, she would want him to continue to visit them in the main building as often as possible. Stermel, on the other hand, was involuntarily comparing his sister to his favorite girl. He knew they were 2 years apart, but compared to Riken, Scylla was like a small and stupid child. But Scylla had not forgotten the conversation she had come to him with, so after a moment, she asked him what he thought of Lady Kyla. Stermel asked his sister if she meant Earl Wayne's daughter, but the girl asked him to call her by her first name, for he knew her name perfectly well. The cousin knew that Kylie was graduating from the academy this year and had a prom coming up, but rumor had it that the girl still hadn't found a date for the event. It was this fact that formed the basis of Scylla's desire to talk to her brother. She asked her brother to escort her friend to the ball if he hadn't promised to do it to someone else before then. At that moment, the young man remembered how Riken had asked him to go to the prom with her, how he had first thought how wonderful it would be to dance with someone holding hands, but then his thoughts went in a different direction, and he remembered that Riken had thought that the ideal partner for marriage was some baron, with whom their life would be calm and measured. He twirled in his hand a cufflink with a magical purple stone he had created with her especially for the ball, and said he had to refuse Lady Wayne. This answer upset Scylla, but Stermel added that the Earl of Wayne's daughter should choose a better partner for the ball. After he considered the conversation over, he asked his sister to leave him alone. He sat at the table and felt despair settle in his soul. The young man reckoned that it had been over 10 days since he had last seen Riken, and nothing helped him, for he had the feeling that his soul continued to burn and turn to ashes. Riken's condition was no better. She too lay awake at night and often looked at the magic bird, and on one such day she tried to send a message to Stermel, but the bird was no longer anything but a beautiful coaster, for it did not fly to its creator with a piece of paper in its beak. At that moment, standing at the window and looking out at the night garden, the girl realized that this was the end of her love story. It was a new year, and the Tower of Mages welcomed Sir Sturmel as Lord of Water and Wind. But that was just the beginning. After a while, he was elected as the new lord and granted the title of Duke in the Imperial Court of Elda. The title of Duke of Sagna was not one of those titles that were considered mandatory in the Elda Empire, so the young man had little to no influence from the imperial family. Meanwhile, Father Riken and his colleagues were discussing the moment, and it turned out that the emperor had not participated in the ceremony of giving the title to Sturmel. Other politicians have heard that the title was bestowed upon the mage by the crown princess herself. The news that the princess had personally given everything to her brother was from verified sources, so Viscount Copeland concluded that everyone was beginning to prepare for further developments. The men realized that all power was now in the hands of Her Highness, and the new future ruler of the empire was obvious, as the Duke of Sagna now stood behind her back. Sturmel, on the other hand, met with the princess again. She said she had heard that the emperor had sent him a present, but his brother had not even looked at it and had sent it back to their father. The young man confirmed this. He also heard that his act had upset and offended the king very much, but the princess asked him to ignore such things, as the palace was always a breeding ground for gossip. The palace had always been like this. It would remain like this, but they needed to focus on their current affairs. But their cooperation could have been detrimental to those close to them, and it wasn't about their shared father now. After meeting the princess, Sturmel was returning home, and on the way met his cousin, Baron Ador Raft. The Baron noticed that after the mage became duke, the princess began to summon him to her frequently. This week it was the second time. Ador had already begun to worry about his brother, as he rarely came home, and asked him to come home, even though he was busy. Sturmel admitted that he had a backlog of paperwork, a lot of work to do, and he hadn't started building a new house that long ago. Ador understood his cousin, though when he had gotten his title, things had been a little different, and he hadn't had this kind of backlash. The cousin admitted that the whole family counts on him in their house, so he asked his brother to tone it down and not overdo it. Meanwhile, life at Copeland Manor was going on as usual. One day, Riken invited her school friend Mariella to visit and was glad to see her when she arrived. But she noticed at once that her friend looked haggard. The girl immediately started hugging Riken and asking her how she was feeling, the landlady admitting that she was much better now than she had been a few days ago. Mariella also knew that Riken had already had visitors, but she was sure that they had only come to eat sweets and nothing more. The friend confessed that she, like the others, had heard that Lady Copeland had parted with Sir Sturmel when she heard that he was about to receive the title. The girl understood why her friend had done so, for it was better to end it all herself than to let evil tongues constantly wash her bones for no reason. Mariella went on and said that Riken understood all of this perfectly well without her, but then added that if she had said she would go to the prom with Baron Heldi, she would have believed it. Riken didn't quite understand what that meant, so the guest explained that choosing a prom partner was considered something akin to choosing a fiancé. This was probably the reason why her family didn't mind her daughter's meetings with this man, because there was a lot going on between them. This surprised the girl a little, as she had never thought of it that way. But then she told her friend that she was the one who had ended her relationship with Sturmel. Mariella admitted that she wished she could believe her friend, but that wasn't the case at all. So Riken began to reassure her otherwise, saying that the mage truly believed that their relationship could endure anything in the world. But it wasn't true, and she herself morally couldn't take the pressure from all sides, so now it was all in the past and she forgot all about it. And today was already the graduation ceremony. It was an event specifically for the men, where they received awards, gave speeches. It was an event where the graduates could be flagged down by officials and offered jobs. Girls, on the other hand, did not go to such meetings, as most of them were aristocrats. Another thing is the prom. This event was really important for every self-respecting girl, because it was there that they declared themselves and that they had reached the age of marriage and were ready to create their own families. Riken looked at her friend and asked her if her dress for the ball was ready. She replied that it was almost, and only a few details were left. The girl admitted that her dress originally had a huge bow on the back, and she had to argue for a week about removing it. Since the ball was already tomorrow, the girls said goodbye, as each of them needed to finish their preparations. Mariella asked her friend to dress up, and Riken wished her a safe and easy journey home. Riken was alone in her room. Not long ago, she had thought that prom was a long time away, and that tomorrow it would all be over. And then the day came. The girl realized that under other circumstances, she would never have gone there. Now all the maids in the house were helping her with her beauty. The dress, the hair, the makeup, everything was perfect. But even that didn't save her from a gloomy mood that was hard to hide. She'd even taken a better skincare regimen today, but it hadn't done her any good, and she didn't see the point in it anymore. Penny watched her mistress and saw that something was wrong, and that's when Lady Grace came into the room and asked her daughter if she was ready. When the woman saw her little girl, she realized that her daughter was a real beauty. She was worried that the dress Riken had chosen was not suitable for the young girl, but it turned out that she was wrong. The protagonist smiled and said that she had said right away that she knew what suited her and what didn't. But her mother was still worried and amazed at her daughter's confidence in this matter. At that moment, one of the maids came into the room and announced that Baron Hadley had arrived. The woman was glad of the young man's punctuality, for they had just finished making all the arrangements. And here's the final touch. Penny brought her prom shoes. When the maid showed them to her mistress, there was no delight or approval in her eyes, for they were not at all what she would have wanted. They wore a very small heel of an ugly shape to match the Baron in height. But the girl had nothing to do, and she put them on and went down to the young man who was waiting for her downstairs. Riken looked at Harold and realized that he looked very familiar at that moment. The Baron greeted Lady Copeland first and kissed her hand. Then he held out his hand to the girl, and she suddenly thought of how he had always been like this, always smiling even in her past life. At that moment, Viscount Copeland approached them. He asked Baron Haldy to take care of his daughter. The young man promised her father that Riken would be perfectly safe with him. The couple got into the carriage and were about to leave, while the girl's parents stood in the courtyard and looked at her. When they were alone in the carriage, the girl thanked the Baron for accepting her unexpected proposal. The man replied that it was a great honor for him to perform this role, accompanying her to the prom. To top it all off, Harold was a little embarrassed to learn that it was his mother who had advised and suggested his candidacy to her as a partner in this event. Riken tried to change the atmosphere and said that his mom was just really worried about her, since she didn't have a date for the prom. And Harold suddenly realized that Lady Copeland was very fond of his parent. The protagonist assumed that the Baroness thought their families were status perfect. Riken saw that not only she was uncomfortable, but also her companion, perhaps even more so. She wished they were comfortable together, but for some reason, they weren't. So she asked the young man not to worry so much. The girl admitted that she had seen enough of different people, and not all of them were decent people and gentlemen. But when he agreed to keep her company for this special evening, she felt a great peace of mind as she realized she could trust him. After these words, Harold began to relax a little. A smile appeared on his face, and the girl realized that she had achieved the desired result. She knew very well that Harold had lost his father at a very young age, so he had to become the head of the family when he was not ready for it. So he always suffered under the pressure of the people around him and his responsibilities. Knowing this, the girl decided that in this life will definitely help him with everything to cope with, because most likely she is the one who knows him best in this world. Riken hoped that they could live happily ever after in this life. So when they arrived at the meeting place, she said they could dance the mazurka and go home. He didn't mind this turn of events, but he was worried about whether she would be okay because it was her senior prom. So that he wouldn't worry, she said she didn't like such lavish banquets. The girl thought that one dance would be enough, as the ball was not a celebration organized in her honor. To top it all off, she didn't want to stay for the rest of the evening, as she was sure people with strange interests would start approaching her. Having agreed on everything, they entered the ballroom where music was already playing, and many people had gathered. The first to approach the couple was Deborah, who was delighted with Riken's dress, and noted that it suited her friend very well. Deborah was also very beautiful that day, and both girls were happy that all of their classmates were able to find partners and attend the prom. Surprisingly, even Baron Ador Raft came to the event today and caused quite a furor with his appearance. Until that evening, few people knew what he looked like, as the young man had only recently begun to appear in high society. Deborah had already gathered information on him. It turned out he was 24 years old, but still had no wife or fiancé. but there were rumors that his sister, Lady Scylla, was to make her official debut this year. Riken knew very well that even if this beautiful man was not married, girls like her or her friend should not even hope for anything in relation to him, as he had to create a family with a girl of his circle. But today, he was accompanying Lady Wayne. Deborah had noticed that both he and she were very popular in high society. Suddenly, Deborah turned to Riken and asked her if she had met Ador Raft before, to which Lady Copeland replied that they had not crossed paths before. Riken's friend was excited. She was hoping that Sturmel would show up at the ball, but Riken herself wasn't really looking forward to meeting him. At this moment, Harold intervened in their conversation. He had heard not too long ago that Duke Sagna was not going to attend such events for a while, so he was unlikely to come today as well. Deborah was disappointed, as she thought Sturmel was a great man and wanted to see him at least from the outside and from a distance. A new tune came on again. This time it was a polka, but Riken didn't want to dance and preferred to relax a little longer over the conversation. The couples began to dance as suddenly the doors to the ballroom opened again and someone began to enter. Everyone stopped and looked at the person who was entering the ballroom. No wonder people had such a reaction. Duke Sturmel Sagna himself came to the event. People started whispering to each other. They noticed that the mage was heading towards his cousin, Baron Ador Raft. Riken had not expected to see him here, so she immediately changed in her face, and Deborah was even afraid that her friend had gotten sick and suggested that she rest for a while. This threw the girl off balance, so to avoid losing her composure completely, she decided to escape to the break room and told Harold that they would see each other a little later. The protagonist with all her legs ran into the restroom and closed the door behind her. She thought that she was fine, that her feelings for Sturmel were gone, but it turned out that she was fooling herself and nothing good happened. Riken was sitting on a chair alone and crying. That's how Miss Rode found her. The nanny was very worried about her ward and looked everywhere for her. And the first thing the woman did was to start reprimanding the girl for behaving very rudely to Baron Haldley and the other guests of the evening. Riken herself realized that she had made a mess of things with her abrupt disappearance and intemperate behavior. The protagonist suddenly realized that the song to which she wanted to dance with the herald had already passed, and the nanny meanwhile poured her water and told her that she, as a real lady, should be steadfast in any life situation and not show others her weaknesses. Besides, a real lady would never allow herself to lose her dignity. The girl accepted the cup and said she knew it herself. Riken apologized to Miss Rode, but she said the girl shouldn't apologize to her. Then she looked her over from head to toe and said that her makeup, hair, and outfit were still as beautiful as ever. And in general, her mistress was the most beautiful. The nanny asked her ward if she wished to go home immediately. The girl said that she had to apologize to Baron Haldley first. Miss Rode thought it was the right thing to do, as she herself had not been able to explain much to the young man since she had come here right away. Riken, on the other hand, asked her nanny to tell the Baron that she would be waiting for him to talk in the room where the tea ceremony was being held. The girl stood up and looked at herself. She didn't realize exactly where she was beautiful, and then told herself to calm down and act deliberate and confident. She reappeared in the ballroom and realized that there were too many guests for the evening, so it would be difficult for Harold to come to her by sneaking through all that crowd. So she decided to find another room to talk to him. But it didn't turn out the way she wanted it to, as Riken was called out by Lady Kayla Wayne, who approached her with her girlfriends. Riken involuntarily admired the former classmate's beauty. The protagonist realized that no matter how hard she tried, being a little and silly girl wasn't going to work for her. The obvious thing was that Kayla wanted to talk to her, since they had last seen each other at the Wiccan, but this conversation was obviously not going to be a pleasant one. Lady Wayne looked intently at Lady Copeland and said that Sir Sturmel had originally been her partner for this ball, but she had not come here with him, but with Baron Haldley. Riken didn't deny it, since it was already obvious. Kylie, however, went on and called her behavior disrespectful to her first partner. Everyone knew that Riken herself had invited Sir Sturmel, and then almost before the event itself had turned him down. This was unbecoming behavior for a lady, as it was too late to change partners at that point. Lady Wayne continued. She speculated that perhaps at first, when Lady Copeland had only invited Lord Waters to the ball and then changed her mind, she had not known that she would damage his reputation. In other words, she had embarrassed him. Kylie understood that her father wanted to reassure her, but when she found out that Stürmel was going to the ball with Riken, she couldn't believe it, because she knew very well that maybe he had turned her down because of the difference in status, and this was such news. But no matter what happened, she always wanted to become a noble and worthy lady to live up to Duke Sagna's standards. And for a long time, everything went according to plan, until she heard the story of his parting with Riken. The girl was madly angry and infuriated that Lady Copeland had done such a cruel thing to the man she desired with all her heart. Kayla couldn't understand why Sir Stürmel had been looking among the crowd of other people all evening, looking only for Lady Copeland. Lady Wayne tried to shame Riken, for she had so inhumanly turned her back on Stürmel and immediately started going on dates with Baron Hadley. In this war of words, Riken wasn't going to concede. She said that Kayla was contradicting herself, as just a moment ago she had claimed that she was no match for a man like Duke Sagna. The protagonist understood that she had no right to get close to him, especially now that he had gained the title, and everyone recognized and acknowledged his status. Kayla agreed with that, but she didn't think Riken had the moral authority to start this whole story from day one, because this man was beyond her. The protagonist was already starting to get bored with this conversation, as she personally apologized to Stürmel, and yes, she knew she made a mistake when she spoke to him first. However, whether or not to forgive her would be decided by only one person, and that was Sir Stürmel. So this was not a matter she could be blamed for by outsiders like Kayla. One of Lady Wayne's friends suggested that the girls sit down and talk quietly. Riken had no desire to continue this dialogue, so she said she was going to leave. Lady Wayne's friends were not going to just let her go. They asked her what would happen to their friend if she just left like that. The other one suggested that Riken have a drink and then leave. Riken asked one of the girls to step aside, as she wanted to leave, but she didn't let her go and said that she didn't suggest to fight, but to solve everything peacefully by means of dialogue. This girl had already started to hold out a glass of red wine to the protagonist, and then this girl spilled this wine on Riken, pretending it was an accident, and the protagonist realized that if she ruined her dress now, the ball would be over for her. And at that very moment, Duke Sagna appeared in the room with one question as to what was just happening here. Riken was ready to bathe in the wine, but not a single drop got on her as the glass froze in midair, causing everyone in the room to gasp in surprise. The culprits froze in place in mute consternation upon seeing the Duke. The young man covered Riken with himself, and the girls tried to justify themselves, but it sounded as lame as possible. Behind his brother, Ador Raft entered the room and could only mumble his cousin's name. And then he noticed that the atmosphere here was too unsettling, so he asked what had happened here. One of the girls said that Lady Riken shared with them that she wasn't feeling well, so she was going to leave the banquet. The second added that they thought that if the girl drank a glass of wine, she would immediately feel better. But here he was sure of something quite different, so he looked at Lady Copeland and asked her what had happened here after all. She tried to prove to him that nothing had happened and didn't want to accept the outstretched hand, to get up, because she could do it herself. Nevertheless, he helped her up and held her by the shoulders now. Now, Lady Wayne tried to say that all was not as it might seem to him, but Stürmel would not listen to her and asked if she thought him so foolish a man. He knew full well that Kayla was the one in this crowd of girls who had the most influence, and hardly anything could happen without her tacit approval. And then he added that he hadn't expected anything like this from her. So he was very disappointed in her now. Meanwhile, a cousin came up to Stürmel and tried to calm him down, telling him that all the guests only had eyes for him, so he'd better not get involved in the situation. But the Duke didn't care. He asked Ador to get out of his way as he wanted to talk to Lady Riken. The Baron only lowered his head and sighed heavily. Ador realized it was best not to cross his brother now, so he suggested Lady Kylie get some fresh air, and she agreed to it. The Baron and the Count's daughter left the room, and Stürmel was left alone there with Riken. After the door closed behind the pair, Riken released the Duke's hand and thanked him for his help. The girl admitted that she was sorry for bothering him, but at the same time, she wouldn't look him in the eye and looked very sad. Stürmel could not bear to be treated like this when he was sober, so he drank a glass of wine in a gulp. Then he set his glass on the table and said that he had never thought of his actions toward her as idle concern. He admitted that he had done all of this solely for her, because he wanted to, because his heart told him to. The young man didn't realize if things were different for her towards him. Riken couldn't stand it. She snapped into a raised tone and said that she had always wanted to show him only the best parts of herself, but she didn't want to make him uncomfortable anymore. And then she crouched down in a beautiful curtsy and congratulated him on winning the title, albeit belatedly. The protagonist no longer looked him in the eye, but spoke of the fact that the future of their empire depended on the Duke, and for that, as the daughter of the Copeland family, she thanked him for it. The young man hadn't expected that to be the only thing she wanted to say to him. Riken said she was very happy for him, because now all the aristocrats' eyes were fixed on him, and soon he would meet his destiny. And when he meets his lady, he has feelings for her. But Sturmel couldn't listen to this nonsense any further, for he couldn't understand why she was saying all this, why she didn't want to hear it. Duke Sagna didn't want her to say such a thing to him, and also with that expression on her face, so he tried to reach for her. And then he noticed that her face had gotten very gaunt since they'd last seen each other. The young man asked her about whether she was having trouble sleeping or whether she was having a lot of pain. His concern was throwing her off balance, so she asked him to stop being so courteous to her. Sturmel did not understand her, so he asked her to look at him, for she kept looking away from him. He said that if he meant nothing to her and she felt nothing for him, then she didn't need to avoid him. Riken couldn't take it anymore. She snapped into a scream and said that no matter how much she apologized to him, it still wouldn't be enough. But there was nothing else she could do, so she asked him to leave her alone. The girl was well aware that she was stupid and not serious, so she got close to him to play around. Now she was looking him in the eye and asking him not to waste his time and energy on a conniving girl like her. The young man would not leave and let her go. He asked the girl about whether it was true that she had become a baroness. She confirmed it. The mage realized that Raihin's choice was most likely Baron Heldi, but still Sturmel didn't want to believe that it was that man. Raihin thought seriously and wanted to marry him. He didn't understand why she thought that it was with the Baron that she could have a quiet, peaceful, and happy life. The protagonist was finding this conversation more and more difficult by the minute, so she wanted to end it, and reiterated that she was confident in her choice of her future husband. At that moment, Sturmel took her hand and asked why her face then expressed such deep sadness. Holding her hand now, he realized that in his soul all along, he had wanted to make her regret what she had done to him, to make her suffer as he had. But then at some point, he realized that he wanted her to be happy and meet a decent man who could give her what she dreamed of, since he had no more desire to see her heartache. So now he was sincerely saying that he would always love only her. The girl knew it, felt it, but said that love wasn't that important in life. Yet her tears dripped onto the parquet in the room. Sturmel didn't understand her, so he asked what mattered in this life then, if even love wasn't that important. The girl was already sobbing, but asserted that no matter what happened in this life, she would never mistake what was important to her specifically. Unfortunately, he barked out that he wasn't the most important person in the world to her. He was hurting and she was hurting, but he demanded that she say it while looking him in the eye. At that moment, images of her past life flashed before her eyes, of her little and then grown-up daughter, who wished she had met someone better than her father, because she had lived for her mother. So Riken said without hesitation that the most important person in her life was her daughter. It was a confession. It was hysterical. The girl asked him to stop interfering in her life because she was not 19 years old, but 45. She had raised a beautiful daughter over the years. Also in her past life, she was riding in a wagon and had an accident that caused her to die in the future. But when she opened her eyes again, she found herself in the past. Riken was aware that from the outside it looked like she had lost her mind, but she was in her right mind for all the words and the absurdity of the situation. Sturmel was now beginning to understand a little of what was going on, and the girl assured him that she was not lying and was telling the truth. She claimed it was not a dream, as she clearly remembered the sensations of holding her newborn daughter in her arms, feeding her with her milk, seeing her first steps, and cuddling her until she fell asleep. The girl remembered every day she spent with her daughter, the way they planted and then tended the flowers in the garden. So it didn't matter to her whether she loved him or not, because the most important thing to her in this life was her precious little girl. After all, Riken had given birth to her by breaking her bones and tearing her body apart, and then raised her, her only child. And now more than anything else in the world, the protagonist wanted to meet her favorite daughter and will do everything in her power and even more for this. Yes, Stürmel was madly surprised and didn't know what to say to her or what to do, so he crouched down next to her and began to lift her into his arms. She lost consciousness for a moment, so he was able to use magic and carry her away from here without explanation. The young man carried her into his home to calmly continue the conversation and try to resolve the problem. He sat her down on the bed and told her that this was his new home, and since there were still very few servants, no one would hear their conversation. Riken wouldn't stop crying, so Stürmel brought her a towel so she could wipe her tears with it. She accepted a towel and began wiping her eyes, while thinking that all the makeup was now spreading across her face. But it didn't matter to Duke Sagna whether she had makeup or not. She was always beautiful to him in any form. He thought to himself that during the conversation with his mentor, he had said things that were true now, because all people and the truth in this world are subject to their desires. But there are for whom there are much more important things, and from the experience. He clenched his fists. Then the old man advised him to pay attention to other people's problems instead of digging into his own, thinking that was all that mattered. Yes, Stürmel knew that Riken didn't care about status, power, or position in society, but how could what she had just talked about be possible? He, as a very talented magician, knew that his colleagues and predecessors had always been concerned and interested in the question of returning to the past. But for a long time, so much has not been studied on this issue. However, Stürmel knew of one theoretical way that could have a similar effect, but a mage who could go for something so crazy he hadn't met in his lifetime. The young man sat down next to the girl and suggested that what might have been a vision of the future. Perhaps she saw pictures of her future so clearly that she believed it had all happened to her before. Riken was silent, disagreeing with him. Stürmel continued and said that many mages had studied the possibilities of time and space travel before. They came to the general conclusion that in theory, there was an option to do something like this, but in practice it proved pointless and impossible. Lady Copeland could not believe it, for she had, as it were, but gone back in time. Stürmel explained that magic can only be used in the material world, and time magic was no exception. Matter is always necessary for magic, so he was sure that it was impossible to use magic to send a soul that couldn't be touched back in time. Any magic always obeys the law of boomerang, meaning that when he uses water magic, it seems as if he is creating new water. But it was quite different, for as much water as he took, so much less of it became available in the world where they lived. However, the volume of water in the world does not change, so it was impossible to remove something from this world completely, or to make something bigger. Based on that, if one wanted to go back 10 years into the past, there was only one way to do it. Namely, the magician had to turn back time for the whole world except himself. Then all the clocks in the world would go back 10 years. It was a very difficult and nearly impossible task. But even if the magician had succeeded, the problem was the very nature of magic itself. After all, one had to think about the very mage who could pull this off, because even if someone turns back time for only 1 second, their body receives a powerful backlash, then it's hard to imagine what the payoff would be if the number of years goes over 10. As a consequence, the human body, which can live for about 100 years, all animals, people and plants, elements and spaces and time itself, everything will receive a blowback. So even if there was a mage who sent Riken back in time, the very moment he did so, he disappeared from this world. Stürmel considered time travel pointless for this reason, as he did not personally know a mage who could sacrifice himself for another person. Riken sobbed again as she didn't want to believe what he had just told her. After all, her daughter was a time mage, and what he was telling her now was that even if she tried to turn the world upside down, she still wouldn't be able to meet her favorite child. The girl didn't hold back her tears, as it was her girl who sent her back in time to a time before she was born. Stürmel recalled the moment when everything in his life changed. That's when he met Riken, who was enveloped in magic. He had made a mistake then, as he had thought that was the result of the alliance with the mage, but now he realized that he hadn't realized how special she was, so he had missed the moment when she badly needed his help and support. Riken confessed to him that her daughter had talked to her about it, and asked her to go back in time if she wanted to, not to give birth to her again, and to live the life her heart desires. It was a conversation she remembered very well, as her girl was 19 years old and going to her senior prom from the academy. And then, when she was dying after the accident, her daughter whispered to her that when she was reborn, she should not remember her and live a long and happy life.